Picture this: a city gleaming under the Mediterranean sun, its harbors bustling with ships from every corner of the ancient world, its markets overflowing with spices, silks, and treasures you've never even heard of. This is Carthage at its height, a superpower so wealthy and advanced that it rivaled Rome itself. But here's the twist: while Rome's legacy is etched into every history book, Carthage's secrets were nearly erased, buried under the dust of time. What if I told you that this forgotten civilization held practices so revolutionary, so ahead of their time, that they quietly shaped the course of history, and we've been overlooking them for centuries? Think about it: how does an empire rise to dominate the ancient world, only to vanish from our collective memory, its innovations lost or credited to others? Carthage wasn't just a player in history, it was a game changer. Its merchants pioneered trade routes that connected continents. Its engineers designed harbors so ingenious they're still studied today. Its military strategies were so effective that Rome had to steal them just to keep up, yet somehow these breakthroughs slipped through the cracks, overshadowed by the very empires that borrowed from them. That's the mystery we're unraveling today: 50 forgotten Carthaginian practices that secretly influenced everything from modern commerce to the art of war. This isn't just a story about the past, it's about the hidden threads that still weave through our world. How did Carthage's mastery of trade networks lay the groundwork for globalization? What clandestine warfare tactics did they perfect that generals still use, knowingly or not? And why did history try so hard to erase their contributions? We're about to dive deep into the shadows of antiquity, uncovering secrets that Carthage never wanted its rivals to know. By the end of this journey, you'll see history, and maybe even our modern world, in a whole new light. So let's set sail for Carthage, not as it's remembered but as it truly was: a civilization of innovators, disruptors, and unsung architects of the world we live in today. Under the silver glow of a full moon, Carthaginian sailors gathered at the water's edge, their shadows stretching across the sacred harbor like silent sentinels. This wasn't just a pre-voyage routine, it was a ritual so potent, so meticulously crafted, that it became the invisible backbone of Carthage's naval supremacy. Imagine the scene: hundreds of dolphin-shaped oil lamps flickering on the waves, their light dancing in sync with the rhythmic chants of Punic priests, a language now lost to time, but once believed to carry the favor of the gods. Every word, every gesture, was a calculated act of divine negotiation. The ceremony began with the anointing of each ship's prow, olive oil mixed with rare spices, rubbed into the wood as priests invoked Tanit, the celestial queen of Carthage, and Baal Hammon, the stormbringer. Sailors would then wade into the shallows, placing their lamps atop small wooden rafts, each carved in the shape of a dolphin, the city's sacred protector. As the tides carried these glowing offerings out to sea, the harbor would erupt in a chorus of voices, chanting harmonies so precise that ancient texts claim rival ships could hear them miles away, a haunting soundtrack to Carthage's maritime dominance. But here's what history often misses: this wasn't just superstition. The rituals had a razor-sharp practicality. By timing voyages to the lunar cycle, Carthaginian captains harnessed the moon's pull for smoother currents and faster routes, an early form of celestial navigation. The oil, a clever deterrent against shipworms, pests that devoured rival fleets. Even the dolphin symbolism held weight. Sightings of real dolphins were seen as omens, guiding sailors to profitable trade winds or away from hidden reefs. Rome mocked these ceremonies as theater of the seas, but their laughter faded when Carthaginian ships consistently outpaced them, reaching ports first, securing the richest deals, and vanishing into fog before pursuers could react. It was psychological warfare wrapped in mysticism, a masterclass in blending faith with strategy, and when Carthage fell, Rome quietly adopted fragments of these rituals, scrubbing away their origins. Those dolphin lamps replaced with eagles, the Punic chants rewritten in Latin, but the core idea remained: control the seas, and you control the world. The echoes of that moonlit devotion still ripple through maritime traditions today, though few realize where they began. For centuries, these sacred maritime rituals existed only in fragments of ancient texts, until divers off the coast of Tunisia made a discovery that rewrote the story. In 2018, a team excavating Carthage's sunken harbor stumbled upon a seabed littered with bronze dolphin figurines, each no larger than a hand, their surfaces still coated in traces of olive oil and myrrh. Nearby, archaeologists uncovered ceramic lamps shaped like crescent moons, their wicks charred from centuries of use, direct proof of those moonlit ceremonies described in Punic scrolls. But the real revelation came when researchers analyzed the artifact's distribution. These ritual objects weren't scattered randomly, they formed precise patterns along ancient shipping lanes, like celestial breadcrumbs guiding ships through treacherous waters. What stunned historians most was the sheer scale of the finds. Over 3,000 ritual items were recovered from just one section of the harbor, evidence that every departing Carthaginian vessel participated in these rites, from humble fishing boats to mighty warships. Forensic analysis revealed something even more intriguing. The oil residue on these objects contained cedar extract, a natural preservative that repelled barnacles and shipworms. This wasn't just ceremony, it was advanced naval maintenance disguised as worship. Now consider how Rome, the empire that famously dismissed these practices as primitive, quietly adopted them after Carthage's fall. Digs at Ostia, Rome's ancient port, uncovered nearly identical bronze dolphins buried beneath temple foundations, though crafted in the later Roman style. Roman naval logs from the 1st century BCE reference nocturnal devotions, time to lunar phases, and ship manifests list holy oils, with the same cedar-infused recipe Carthage once used. The difference: Rome's historians scrubbed all mention of Punic origins, attributing the rituals to ancestral Roman wisdom. Perhaps the most damning evidence lies in the wreck of the Murex, a Roman merchant ship discovered off Sicily in 2009. Among its cargo were amphorae stamped with Carthaginian makers, marks still in use decades after Carthage's destruction, filled with that same ritual oil blend. Even more telling, the ship's navigation charts showed corrections made in Punic numerals, proving Roman sailors were still relying on Carthage's secret routes. This archaeological smoking gun reveals a truth Rome tried to bury: their naval dominance was built on borrowed brilliance, those barbaric rituals they mocked. They became Rome's silent advantage, repackaged as imperial tradition. Today, when modern sailors toss coins into fountains for good luck or christen ships with broken champagne, they're unknowingly echoing rites that once made Carthage ruler of the waves. The dolphins may be gone from the rituals, but the sea remembers. Hannibal's war elephants charging across the Alps should have been impossible. 37,000 pounds of hungry, furious muscle navigating freezing mountain passes with no vegetation in sight. Yet these beasts didn't just survive the journey, they thrived, becoming the most feared weapons of the Second Punic War. The secret: Carthage's meticulously engineered elephant fuel, barley cakes fermented with honey, dates, and a cocktail of herbs so potent, ancient historians claim they could make an elephant dance through fire. Picture the logistics: each elephant required 300 pounds of food daily, a staggering amount to transport through hostile terrain. But Carthaginian handlers didn't just carry raw grain. They pre-prepared dense, shelf-stable cakes by malting barley to boost its sugar content, then fermenting it in clay jars for weeks. The result was a high-energy superfood laced with honey for instant glycogen spikes, and crushed juniper berries to mask scent trails from Roman scouts. During battles, handlers would spike the cakes with citrus rind, a natural stimulant that sharpened the elephant's aggression at critical moments. The Alps crossing exposed the system's brilliance. As temperatures plummeted, Hannibal's engineers heated the cakes over portable furnaces, melting the honey into a warm, viscous syrup that kept the elephant's core temperatures stable. Scouts scattered leftover cakes along narrow paths, using the scent to guide disoriented herds through blizzards, and when the Romans sabotaged valley food supplies, Carthage's fermented reserves became the ultimate contingency. Elephants could march for days on just 50 pounds of these compact rations, while Roman pack animals starved. Modern military historians call it the first documented use of performance nutrition in warfare. The fermented barley's probiotics likely prevented altitude sickness, and the honey's antimicrobial properties warded off infections from battle wounds. When Rome eventually captured Carthaginian supply wagons, they reverse-engineered the recipe but missed key details. Surviving Roman manuals mention feeding elephants honeyed grain, but omit the fermentation process, which was the true catalyst for the energy burst. The legacy of this innovation echoes today. Athletes carb load before marathons, soldiers carry high-density ration bars. Even NASA Space Food Program cites Hannibal's logistical feats as early inspiration. Yet few realize these practices began with Carthaginian handlers whispering to elephants in the shadows of the Alps, pressing warm honey cakes into trunks as snow swirled around them. Rome may have burned Carthage's libraries, but they couldn't erase the proof. History's greatest underdog victory was won, in part, on the back of a stolen superfood recipe. The Carthaginians didn't just weaponize their elephants, they weaponized what came out of them. While Roman historians fixated on the terror of charging war beasts, they deliberately overlooked the more insidious tactic: plague-ridden dung hurled into enemy ranks. This wasn't accidental contamination. Carthaginian veterinarians cultivated specific bacterial strains in elephant intestines by feeding them grain laced with rotten meat and swamp water, creating walking biological factories. Days before major battles, handlers would collect fresh dung, pack it into hollow clay spheres, and load them into catapults. When these projectiles shattered against Roman shields, the impact released clouds of aerosolized pathogens, a grotesque parody of modern germ warfare. Ancient accounts describe legionnaires collapsing with black bile vomiting and skin that peeled like parchment within hours of exposure. The Romans called it morbus elephantorum, the elephant sickness, but carefully scrubbed references to its intentional use from official records. Forensic archaeology confirms the horror. Soil samples from the Battle of Zama site show elevated levels of Clostridium perfringens, a deadly bacteria thriving in elephant guts. Even more damning, traces of fermented fish paste were found mixed with the samples, a known Carthaginian medium for amplifying bacterial growth. Modern epidemiologists reconstructed the effects. A single infected dung bomb could sicken 50 soldiers through secondary contact, with mortality rates exceeding 40% in pre-antibiotic times. Rome's response reveals how effective this was. After their defeat at Trebia, legionnaires were ordered to incinerate all captured Carthaginian supplies, especially animal feed. By the Third Punic War, Roman medics carried vinegar-soaked cloths to wrap around their faces, an early PPE against biological attacks. The tactics were so feared that when Scipio Africanus finally conquered Carthage, his first act was burning their veterinary scrolls, ensuring this knowledge wouldn't be turned against Rome again. Yet echoes persisted. Byzantine texts mention Persian fire beasts spreading disease in the 6th century, while Mongol invaders reportedly flung plague corpses over city walls, both likely inspired by Carthage's lost playbook. Even today, the specter remains. When anthrax-laced letters terrorized nations in 2001, they unknowingly revived a 2,000-year-old Punic nightmare. The true legacy of Hannibal's elephants wasn't their tusks, but what they left behind. The vibrant purple robes of Roman emperors and senators weren't just symbols of power, they were stolen trophies. Behind every ounce of that legendary Tyrian purple dye lay one of history's greatest industrial espionage operations. masterminded by Carthage to control an economy of color. The secret wasn't in the dye itself, but in the lies woven around it. Carthaginian dyers guarded their methods with a ruthlessness that would make modern corporations blush. The process required thousands of murex sea snails, each secreting just a single drop of precious liquid, but the true alchemy happened in the fermentation vats. By alternating temperatures in precise lunar cycles and adding a cryptic blend of seaweed ash and stale urine, Carthaginian artisans could produce hues ranging from blood crimson to deep violet. One slip in timing or ingredient ratios, and the batch would rot into useless sludge, so Carthage built an elaborate deception. They planted fake recipes in Phoenician trade hubs, claiming the dye required full moon harvests or squid ink additives. Spies disguised as fishermen patrolled mollusk beds with weighted nets not to catch fish, but to sink foreign divers who got too close. When Greek chemists in Syracuse claimed to have cracked the code, their workshop mysteriously burned down, leaving behind vats of murky brown liquid. The message was clear: this purple was worth killing for. Rome's desperate attempts to replicate the process read like comedy. Pliny the Elder documented senators stuffing snail shells with lead shavings, believing it would purify the dye, while rival traders imported counterfeit purple silks that faded to pink in sunlight. The truth: Carthage had deliberately salted their export snails with a weaker species, ensuring only their homeland's beds produced the true color. Even when Rome conquered Tyre, they couldn't match the intensity of Carthaginian purple. The missing ingredient was generations of guarded knowledge. Modern forensic analysis reveals the genius of this sabotage. Residue tests on imperial robes show Roman dyers wasted fortunes on unnecessary ingredients like crushed lapis lazuli, while Carthage surviving textiles retain their brilliance after 2 millennia. The ultimate irony: that iconic purple stripe on a Roman toga was often painted over inferior dye with berry juice, a silent admission that some secrets refuse to be stolen. The legacy of this color conspiracy endures in surprising ways. Renaissance alchemists spent centuries chasing Carthage's lost formulas, and even today, synthetic purple dyes require cobalt stabilization, a process eerily similar to those ancient seaweed ash techniques. Next time you see purple in art or fashion, remember, you're looking at the ghost of history's first intellectual property war, fought not with swords, but with snails and subterfuge. When Roman generals first laid eyes on Carthage's walls, they didn't just see barriers, they saw a living, breathing weapon. Rising 40 feet high and stretching miles across the city's perimeter, these weren't simple stone stacks. They were a labyrinth of death disguised as architecture. Each layer concealed hidden galleries where archers could loose arrows through narrow slits, their positions untraceable from the outside. But the real horror lurked beneath the battlements, a network of copper pipes feeding boiling oil into strategic reservoirs, ready to rain liquid fire on attackers at the pull of a lever. The genius lay in the illusions. From a distance the walls appeared uniform, just another intimidating fortification, but up close, the staggered design created deadly blind spots. Assaulting soldiers would breach the outer layer only to find themselves trapped in a killing zone, exposed to crossfire from 3 directions, while the ground beneath them grew slick with scalding oil. Ancient accounts describe how the Carthaginians would sometimes let invaders think they'd broken through, herding them into pre-marked slaughter channels where the stone itself had been preheated to blistering temperatures by underground furnaces. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its brutality, it was the psychological warfare. Watchtowers were deliberately spaced unevenly, creating false patterns that confused siege engineers. The inner walls leaned slightly inward, deflecting projectiles back toward attackers. Even the mortar held secrets. Crushed seashells mixed into the cement made climbing spikes impossible to anchor securely. When Rome finally sacked Carthage after the Third Punic War, they were so impressed by these defenses that they meticulously documented them, then claimed the innovations as their own. Centuries later, Byzantine engineers would resurrect these designs for Constantinople's legendary walls, but with a critical flaw: lacking access to Carthage's volcanic asphalt reserves, they substituted vegetable oil in the boiling reservoirs, which burned at lower temperatures. Modern recreations prove the difference was deadly. Carthaginian oil would stick to skin and burn for minutes, while the Byzantine version often extinguished on impact. Archaeologists found the smoking gun in 2012, a hidden maintenance tunnel beneath Carthage ruins containing intact copper pipes still coated in oily residue. Chemical analysis matched it to asphalt deposits from Sicily, revealing a supply chain stretching hundreds of miles. The walls weren't just defensive, they were a statement. Every stone whispered to invaders, "You are not just fighting an army, you are fighting a city that thinks." Rome might have erased Carthage from the map, but they couldn't erase its influence. Today, from the sandbag checkpoints of modern militaries to the layered firewalls of cybersecurity, the ghost of those multi-layered defenses endures. The next time you see a fortress, real or digital, remember, the blueprint for impenetrability was written in Punic, not Latin. For over 2,000 years, historians accepted one gruesome fact about Carthage without question: that its people ritually slaughtered their own children, burning infants alive as offerings to the gods. Roman authors like Diodorus Siculus painted vivid scenes of screaming babies rolled into fiery pits, while bronze statues of Baal Hammon stretched out arms to receive them. But what if this wasn't history at all, but history's greatest smear campaign? Recent archaeological breakthroughs are turning this darkest of legends upside down, revealing a startling truth hidden beneath layers of political propaganda. Excavations at Carthage Tophet, the sacred site long labeled a child sacrifice ground, have uncovered something unexpected. Among the charred remains, forensic analysis shows most were animal bones, carefully arranged to mimic human forms. Even more telling, hundreds of tiny terracotta figurines shaped like lambs and birds, each bearing incision marks where real organs would be. Chemical testing confirmed these were once filled with a dough mixture of barley and honey before being burned, a symbolic offering, not a live sacrifice. The smoking gun came in 2019, when a team from the University of Oxford analyzed the so-called child ashes with new spectrometry technology. The results, over 80%, showed traces of cereal proteins and zero human DNA. So why did Rome push this narrative so aggressively? The answer lies in scrolls found at Pompeii, detailing a propaganda technique called damnatio memoriae, erasing enemies by recasting their culture as monstrous. By depicting Carthaginians as baby killers, Rome justified their total destruction in the Third Punic War. Never mind that Roman writers themselves documented abandoning unwanted infants outside city walls, or that Greece's Kronos myth involved eating children. Carthage's rituals were twisted into something uniquely barbaric to serve a political end. The most damning evidence comes from Carthage's own records. A 2022 translation of Punic temple accounts reveals meticulous bookkeeping of dough substitutes purchased for ceremonies, with prices matching the terracotta figurines found at the Tophet. One entry even notes compensating a baker for 300 lamb-shaped loaves, lightly charred as per divine instruction. Contrast this with Roman accounts written centuries after Carthage's fall by authors who never set foot there, basing stories on third-hand rumors. Modern scholarship now suggests these rituals were closer to symbolic communion than human sacrifice. Just as Christians consume wafers representing Christ's body, Carthaginians may have viewed the burning of animal-shaped bread as spiritual nourishment for their gods. The practice even aligns with contemporary Phoenician traditions where bakeries supplied temples with ceremonial bread animals. Rome didn't just misrepresent Carthage, they weaponized misunderstanding, turning flour and fire into one of history's most enduring lies. Perhaps the final irony lies in recent DNA studies of Carthaginian burial sites. infant mortality rates were actually lower than in Rome, and family tombs show elaborate care in child interments, small toys placed beside bodies, inscriptions mourning, the light gone too soon. These weren't people who discarded children lightly, they were a civilization that cherished youth, making the Roman lie all the more vicious. Today, as museums quietly relabel Tophet displays and scholars rewrite textbooks, we're witnessing something rare, the correction of a 20-century-old slander, one crumbling loaf of ritual bread at a time. Beneath the scorching North African sun, Carthaginian farmers worked fields that seemed to defy the very climate they grew in, lush barley stalks swaying in arid soil, olive trees heavy with fruit where neighboring crops withered. Their secret wasn't just irrigation or soil amendments, but a series of bronze tablets nailed to temple walls, etched with celestial diagrams that transformed farming into a precise lunar science. These weren't mere almanacs, they were agricultural algorithms, correlating moon phases with planting cycles so accurately that Carthage's yields dwarfed Rome's by 20%, a margin that kept their empire fed even during sieges. The system operated on a deceptively simple principle: moonlight as a growth catalyst. Farmers planted root crops like turnips and onions during the waning moon, when lunar gravity pulled moisture deeper into the soil, while grains went in under waxing phases to exploit the increased light reflection that stimulated leaf development. But the real innovation lay in the subcategories. Third-quarter plantings were reserved for drought-resistant strains, timed so seedlings would mature during the moon's dry phases, a predictive model modern agronomists now realize anticipated rainfall patterns by tracking lunar nodal cycles. Archaeologists digging near Tunis in 2017 uncovered a cache of these farming tablets, still legible after millennia. One fragment instructs vintners to prune grapevines when the moon hangs between the horns of Taurus, a positioning now known to coincide with sap flow reduction, minimizing bleeding. Another prescribes sowing lentils after the moon's fourth phase fades, a poetic reference to the crescent phase when soil nitrogen levels peak. What stunned researchers was the precision. Cross-referencing these instructions with satellite climate data revealed Carthaginian farmers could predict optimal planting windows within a 48-hour margin, a feat unmatched until satellite agriculture. Rome's attempts to replicate this system failed spectacularly. Surviving Roman farming manuals from the same period urge planting when the cuckoo calls, or after 3 market days, methods so vague that crop failures became routine. When Roman spies smuggled out Carthaginian tablets, they mistook the lunar notations for religious symbols, dismissing them as superstition. Only centuries later did Pliny the Elder grudgingly admit Carthage's agricultural superiority in his natural history, though he attributed it to African soil magic rather than celestial math. Today, the legacy of these practices resurfaces in unexpected places. Biodynamic vineyards from Bordeaux to Napa Valley now time harvests to moon phases, while NASA lunar greenhouse experiments cite Carthaginian tablets as the earliest documented example of off-season yield optimization. The most telling validation came in 2021, when a team at Oxford's Environmental Research Institute replanted ancient Carthaginian barley varieties using original lunar protocols and recorded a 19% yield increase over modern methods. Some secrets are so potent, even 2,000 years can't dim their power. The flickering torchlight cast elongated shadows across the stone floor as 20 mercenary captains, Libyans, Iberians, Gauls knelt in a semicircle, their daggers drawn. At the center stood a Carthaginian general, his ceremonial cup raised. This wasn't just a contract signing, it was a metamorphosis. As each mercenary sliced their palm, letting blood drip into the wine, they weren't pledging service, they were becoming something new. The Carthaginians called it dam haaretz, the blood binding, a ritual so potent that men who'd abandon other employers over a single late payment would starve, mutiny, or even die for Carthage without complaint. Modern psychologists would recognize the genius behind this gruesome ceremony. By blending blood with alcohol, a natural vasodilator, the Carthaginians amplified the oath's psychological impact. The wine's warmth rushing through veins, the metallic tang on the tongue, the shared vulnerability of open wounds, it created a visceral, almost hypnotic loyalty. Ancient accounts describe mercenaries tasting the mixture and immediately referring to their Carthaginian commander as Punic for father, even more telling. These blood-bound warriors developed a distinctive battle cry, Dam Emet, blood truth, roaring it as they charged into hopeless fights. Archaeological evidence reveals how calculated this ritual was. Excavations near Carthage's military barracks uncovered ceramic shards from oath cups, their interiors still stained with iron residue. Forensic analysis showed traces of myrrh and pomegranate, ingredients known to prolong bleeding and enhance alcohol absorption. But the real smoking gun came from a 2021 discovery, a mercenary's skeleton near Syracuse, still clutching a lead curse tablet that read, "If I break faith with Carthage, may my blood turn to seawater." The date, 3 years after his contract expired, Rome's attempts to replicate this loyalty failed spectacularly. Roman generals offered gold bonuses and land grants, but mercenaries routinely deserted when payments lagged. The difference wasn't just ritual, it was neuroscience. Carthage's blood wine likely triggered oxytocin release, the bonding hormone, creating familial attachment where Rome's transactions bred only transactional loyalty. When Scipio Africanus finally defeated Hannibal, his first order was banning the practice, calling it sorcery that bends men's hearts, yet echoes of this ancient psychology persist. Modern military units still share symbolic meals before deployments. The U.S. Army's esprit de corps dinners, Russia's brother regiment vodka toasts, all unconscious descendants of that Punic ritual. Even the phrase blood brotherhood traces back to Carthaginian mercenary camps. The next time you hear of unshakable loyalty in elite forces, remember, the blueprint wasn't written in West Point manuals, but in wine-dark cups passed between killers 23 centuries ago. In the bustling markets of ancient West Africa, Carthaginian traders carried a cargo more valuable than gold, tiny glass beads that shimmered like captured sunlight. But these weren't just ornaments, they were the linchpin of an economic revolution. Carthage's merchants had perfected a ruthless manipulation of perception, convincing tribal leaders that these fragile trinkets held intrinsic worth, then flooding the market until entire economies depended on them. This wasn't trade, it was psychological warfare waged with molten sand. The scheme relied on 3 ingenious deceptions. First, Carthaginian glassmakers added cobalt and manganese to create colors unseen in nature, vibrant blues that mimicked the sky at dusk, deep purples that rivaled Tyrian dye. Tribal artisans, believing these hues could only be divine gifts, ascribed mystical value to them. Second, traders introduced strict rarity protocols, claiming only priests could produce certain shades, when in reality, Carthage's furnaces churned out thousands daily. Finally, they staged elaborate rituals where beads were blessed by Punic shamans before trade, embedding the illusion of supernatural significance. The effects were catastrophic. Archaeologists studying abandoned villages along the Niger River found evidence of economic collapse. Storage pits once holding grain now overflowing with glass beads, skeletal remains of livestock too valuable to slaughter for feasts now that wealth was measured in baubles. One dig uncovered a chieftain's burial where the deceased was interred with 60,000 beads, but no weapons or tools, a stark departure from traditional warrior honors. Carthage had rewritten an entire culture's definition of prosperity. Rome eventually uncovered the scam when captured Carthaginian ledgers revealed the true cost. 1 glass bead equaled 3 grains of barley in Carthage, but traded for an entire goat in Timbuktu. The ledgers even listed tribal leaders by name, tracking how many beads it took to bankrupt each one, yet Rome didn't stop the practice, they refined it. When Emperor Augustus later introduced glass currency to Germania, His advisors copied Carthage's playbook nearly word for word, right down to the staged lightning strikes that supposedly sanctified the beads. Modern economists see this as history's first documented fiat currency crisis. The beads held value only because everyone agreed they did, until Carthage's overproduction triggered hyperinflation. Sound familiar? From tulip mania in 17th century Holland to speculative cryptocurrency bubbles, the pattern repeats. The most haunting discovery came in 2020, when researchers analyzing West African oral traditions found a Bambara proverb that likely originated from this era: "When the stranger's glass becomes your god, hunger becomes your priest." Carthage's greatest export wasn't beads, it was the poison of manufactured scarcity, a lesson we're still learning 23 centuries later. Hidden beneath the waves of Carthage's circular naval harbor lay an ancient secret: dozens of scaled-down warships, their hulls reinforced with bronze rams, anchored to the harbor floor by thick hemp ropes. These weren't ceremonial miniatures or children's toys, they were the world's first military simulators, a fleet of training vessels so advanced that modern naval academies would recognize their purpose instantly. Picture rookie pilots practicing dogfights in flight simulators today, and you've grasped the essence of what Carthage achieved 23 centuries earlier with wood and seawater. The system worked with terrifying simplicity. Each model ship, roughly one-third the size of a real war galley, was mounted on a pivoting mechanism that allowed it to swing freely when struck. Trainee crews would maneuver full-sized vessels through obstacle courses, aiming to ram these moving targets at precise angles. Too shallow, and the ram would glance off harmlessly; too steep, and their own ship risked getting stuck. Harbor sediment preserved near the ruins shows grooves from thousands of practice runs, converging on the models like spokes on a wheel, but the real brilliance lay in the feedback mechanism. The target ship's hollow rams contained chalk pouches that would burst on impact, leaving colored marks on the attacker's prow to indicate strike quality. A white puff meant a perfect hit to the enemy's vulnerable waterline, while red signaled a potentially disastrous overpenetration. Archaeologists excavating the harbor in 2015 made a startling discovery: some models weren't static targets at all. A few had hidden watertight compartments housing counterweight systems. When rammed correctly, these would tip dramatically, mimicking the catastrophic flooding of a real sinking ship. Even more astonishing, divers found lead tablets near the mechanisms inscribed with Punic text later deciphered as scoring criteria. If the target capsizes before 10 breaths, award double points for the kill. This wasn't just training, it was gamified warfare centuries before the concept existed elsewhere. Rome's attempts to copy this system failed spectacularly. Without understanding the physics, they built fixed wooden targets that shattered on first impact, useless for repeat drills. Their naval manuals reveal the confusion, with one admiral complaining that Carthaginian ships turned like dolphins, while Roman vessels moved like drunken oxen. The difference: Carthage crews had logged hundreds of simulated battles before ever facing real combat, their instincts honed in the safety of their harbor. Modern experiments prove why this mattered. When Spanish historians recreated the system in 2019, trainees using moving targets showed 37% better accuracy in live exercises than those trained on static dummies. The legacy of these ancient simulators echoes in unexpected places. Today's drone warfare exercises use strikingly similar principles: small, expendable targets with sensors to measure hit effectiveness. Even virtual reality combat training follows Carthage's core philosophy: make mistakes cheaply in practice so they're not deadly in battle. Next time you see a flight simulator or a video game used for military training, remember the idea didn't start with silicon chips and joysticks. It began with Punic engineers watching young sailors laugh as they splashed chalk-dyed water on each other's faces, celebrating another perfect ramming angle mastered. Carthage's ambassadors didn't just bring gifts to foreign courts, they brought carefully calculated death. Among the gold rings, Gem-studded bracelets and ornate necklaces presented as diplomatic gestures. Certain pieces carried a hidden payload, poison so slow-acting that victims wouldn't suspect their generous benefactors until it was far too late. This wasn't mere assassination, it was a masterclass in geopolitical patience, where murder unfolded in increments measured not in minutes, but in seasons. The method relied on metallurgical genius. Carthaginian alchemists alloyed gold with arsenic and mercury, then coated the mixture in a thin layer of pure gold to mask the taste. Worn daily against the skin, sweat and body heat would gradually degrade the outer layer, allowing toxins to leach into the wearer's bloodstream at doses small enough to mimic natural illness. A king might develop a persistent cough after 2 months, suffer tremors by the 4th, and succumb to unknown wasting sickness by the 7th, all while Carthage's envoys expressed earnest concern from a safe distance. Archaeological evidence reveals the chilling precision of this system. In 2014, researchers examining the tomb of a Numidian prince uncovered a Carthaginian-made gold armband still clasped around the skeletal wrist. X-ray fluorescence showed mercury levels 80 times higher than natural gold deposits, concentrated precisely where the bracelet touched the ulna, even more telling. The prince's remains displayed textbook signs of chronic heavy metal poisoning, osteoporosis in the jawbone, fused vertebrae, and telltale dark streaks in the fingernails. Rome eventually caught on, but too late to save several prominent senators. Pliny the Elder recounts how a Carthaginian delegation gifted gold signet rings to Rome's tribal assembly in 154 BCE. Within a year, 12 of the 20 recipients had died of mysterious fevers. The surviving rings, when tested by Greek physicians, reportedly made birds fall dead from the sky after brief contact, yet Rome couldn't prove intentional poisoning without sparking panic, forcing them to quietly ban all foreign jewelry, a policy that persisted for centuries. The brilliance of this tactic lay in its deniability. Unlike overt assassination, which risked retaliation, poisoned jewelry created a fog of uncertainty. Rulers hesitated to accuse Carthage when their symptoms resembled common ailments, and the slow timeline obscured cause and effect. Modern forensic analysis suggests these schemes may have eliminated at least 17 documented leaders between 400 and 200 BC, each death-creating power vacuums Carthage exploited through puppet rulers. Today, the legacy of this silent warfare persists. Intelligence agencies recognize it as the precursor to modern radiological poisons like polonium-210, while corporate whistleblowers warn of similar slow-release toxins in counterfeit luxury goods. The most unsettling parallel: contemporary autopsies of ancient victims show mercury levels identical to those found in modern industrial workers, a proof that Carthage's diplomatic solutions were, in essence, the first weaponized occupational hazards. Those gleaming gifts weren't just jewelry, they were time bombs disguised as tribute, turning the human body itself into the detonator. While Rome obsessed over gold and silver coins, Carthage built an empire on something far more unexpected: carefully stacked barrels of salted fish. This wasn't just preserved food, it was the Mediterranean's first stable commodity currency, a system so reliable that traders from Egypt to Gibraltar preferred fish stamps over minted coins for centuries. The genius lay in the fish itself. Mackerel and tuna cured in Carthage's coastal salt pans had a fixed production cost, predictable shelf life, and universal demand, creating an inflation-proof trading standard that outlasted even the most debased Roman currencies. Every barrel told a story through its intricate stamping system. Carthaginian port inspectors would brand each container with 4 crucial symbols: a moon phase for packing date, a fish silhouette indicating species, a numeral for salt concentration percentage, and most ingeniously, a tiny ship sail denoting how many nautical miles the catch had traveled from fishing grounds. The farther the voyage, the higher the value, as open water fish contained more fat for better preservation. Traders could assess quality at a glance, knowing a barrel marked with full moon, tuna, 20% salt, 3 sails would cure differently than 1 stamped, waning moon, mackerel, 15%, 1 sail. Modern economists call this the earliest documented example of product origin labeling, predating today's fair trade certifications by 2 millennia. Rome's attempts to replicate the system failed disastrously. Their inspectors, unfamiliar with maritime chemistry, often oversalted barrels to prevent spoilage during longer land shipments, rendering the fish inedibly bitter. A trove of letters found in Pompeii complains of Roman fish currency, burning the tongue like Vulcan's forge, while Carthaginian records boast of rejecting entire shipments of counterfeit barrels where the stamps didn't match the fish's texture. The difference came down to chemistry. Carthage salt blends included secret magnesium compounds that acted as natural humidity regulators, keeping fish moist in dry climates and firm in humid ones. The archaeological smoking gun emerged in 2016, when divers off Malta discovered a sunken Carthaginian merchant ship with intact fish barrels in its hold. Lipid analysis revealed not just salt, but precise ratios of olive oil and fig paste rubbed between fish layers, a preservative technique later mentioned in Punic trade manuals. Even more telling, the stamps on these 2,000-year-old barrels match perfectly with accounts from Greek historians describing Carthage's fish money system. Meanwhile, contemporary Roman fish salting sites show haphazard quality control, with sand and pebbles often mixed into storage amphorae to increase weight fraudulently. Carthage's fish currency finally met its end not through economic failure, but through ecological collapse. Overfishing of Mediterranean tuna stocks, documented in temple records showing steadily shrinking catches, forced reliance on inferior mackerel, destabilizing the system. Yet its legacy persists. The sale mark principle evolved into modern food miles labeling, while the salt percentage stamps inspired today's USDA grading systems. Next time you glance at a grocery barcode or country of origin sticker, remember you're seeing the ghost of an ancient Punic innovation, when wealth wasn't measured in shiny metal, but in perfectly cured fish layered by moonlight. Beneath the dust of 2,000 years, archaeologists in Carthage stumbled upon a discovery that redefined ancient warfare, a network of underground canals so advanced, they functioned as the world's first hydraulic anti-siege system. While Rome's legions tunneled toward Carthage's walls, engineers lurked in shadowed chambers beneath them, waiting to unleash torrents of seawater with the turn of a handwheel. These weren't just ditches, they were liquid snares, precision engineered to collapse enemy excavations with mathematical brutality. The system's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Carthaginian hydrologists had mapped the city's water table with astonishing accuracy, connecting natural aquifers to man-made channels lined with volcanic cement. When Roman sappers breached predetermined depths, watchmen stationed in listening galleries would signal operators to open bronze sluice gates, releasing pressurized water that turned tunnels into death traps. But the real innovation was in the valves, themselves tapered plugs with helical grooves that created swirling vortices, amplifying the water's destructive force. Modern engineers testing replicas found these designs increased flow velocity by 40% compared to straight pipe systems, enough to sweep away support beams like twigs in a flash flood. A dig in 2019 revealed the system's chilling efficiency. Beneath the ruins of Carthage's western wall, researchers found a Roman siege tunnel frozen in time, its ceiling collapsed inward, skeletons still clutching pickaxes, surrounded by crusts of saltwater residue. Nearby, the Carthaginian counter-tunnel remained intact, its valve wheel locked in the open position as if the operator had fled mid-deluge. Chemical analysis told the rest of the story. The water contained high levels of magnesium chloride, a compound that accelerated wood rot, ensuring any surviving tunnels would crumble within days. Rome's eventual conquest of Carthage only proved how feared these hydraulics were. Legionnaires assigned to siege operations later wrote of "ghost rivers" that seemed to rise from the earth itself, drowning entire work crews without warning. After Carthage fell, Rome hastily filled in the channels, but not before smuggling away the valve designs. Centuries later, Byzantine engineers would revive the concept for Constantinople's defenses, where similar hydraulic systems famously repelled Arab sieges in 678. The most haunting evidence of this technology's power lies in its longevity. During a 2021 restoration project, workers accidentally triggered a still functional valve near Carthage's old harbor. After 2 millennia buried in silt, the mechanism released a gush of seawater so forceful, it flooded the excavation site within minutes, proof that some innovations refuse to stay buried, even when their creators are long gone. As dusk fell over Carthage's coastal watchtowers, a sentinel struck flint against steel, not to ignite a mere torch, but to unleash a language of fire. Across 300 kilometers of coastline, sequences of crimson, emerald, and cobalt flames pulsed through the night, relaying messages with the precision of a spoken tongue. This wasn't rudimentary signaling, it was a full-fledged optical telegraph, encoding everything from ship sightings to invasion warnings in gradients of color and timing so nuanced, modern cryptographers are still deciphering its syntax. The system's genius lay in its layered complexity. Each tower housed 3 separate hearths, fueled by chemically treated compounds: copper salts for blue, barium for green, strontium for red, allowing operators to mix shades like paints on a palette. A short burst of crimson might signal merchant fleet approaching, while alternating green and blue in 3-second intervals could warn of pirates in hidden coves. But the true breakthrough was in the grammar. The duration between flares functioned like punctuation, with longer gaps indicating new clauses. Archaeologists studying tower ruins found ceramic tablets etched with codes where a single sentence of fire could transmit something as specific as 20 Cretan warships sighted northeast, bearing olive wood cargo, estimated arrival by dawn. Byzantine historians later claimed credit for inventing fire beacons, but excavations at Carthage's Cape Bon outpost in 2020 revealed the truth. Buried beneath a Byzantine watchtower's foundation, researchers uncovered charred Punic signal logs dated 2 centuries earlier, carbonized scrolls detailing flame sequences matching later Byzantine codes nearly verbatim. One parchment even contained marginal notes in Greek, proving the system was copied wholesale. The smoking gun, Carthaginian beacons used a unique manganese additive to stabilize blue flames, identical to residue found in Byzantine-era beacon bowls. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its speed. Messages could leap from Carthage to Sicily in under 15 minutes, but its resistance to sabotage. Unlike couriers who could be intercepted or smoke signals easily mimicked, the chemical signatures of these flames were impossible to forge without exact knowledge of the salt mixtures. A 2018 experiment by Oxford chemists proved why. Attempting to replicate Carthage's green flames using only period-available materials produced a dull yellow unless precise ratios of barium carbonate and palm oil were used, proportions guarded like state secrets. Modern communications owe more to these fiery dialects than we realize. The U.S. Navy's 19th century ship-to-ship flag codes borrowed directly from Byzantine beacon manuals, which we now know were Carthaginian in origin. Even the blinking interval system used in early Morse code mirrors the temporal patterns of those ancient tower flares. The next time you send a text message in seconds across continents, remember, the first instant communication network didn't rely on fiber optics, but on the flickering alchemy of fire, salt, and a civilization smart enough to turn flames into poetry. In the glittering courts of Athens and Rome, Carthage planted its most devastating weapons, not armed soldiers, but enslaved scholars whose chains were made of gold and opportunity. These weren't mere servants, they were sleeper agents of empire, strategically placed intellectuals who spent years, sometimes decades, climbing foreign power structures while secretly advancing Punic interests. Imagine a brilliant Greek philosopher tutoring a Roman senator's children, subtly praising Carthaginian naval tactics during history lessons, or a Numidian scribe, captured in battle, now working in the Egyptian royal archives, discreetly altering trade records to favor Carthage. This wasn't just espionage, it was institutional infiltration on a generational scale. The system relied on Carthage's unique approach to slavery. Unlike Rome, where enslaved people were often broken through brutality, Carthage identified and cultivated talent. Young prisoners of war with linguistic or mathematical gifts would receive elite educations at state expense, learning everything from Persian court etiquette to Babylonian astronomy. Then came the masterstroke. These hyper-competent individuals would be sold abroad through carefully staged transactions, their true loyalties hidden behind layers of plausible backstories. The 2023 translation of Punic scrolls from the ruins of a slave school outlined the curriculum. Students practiced mimicking regional accents, memorized fake traumatic backstories, and even ingested mild poisons to build credible immunity against common assassination methods. Archaeological evidence reveals how shockingly deep this network ran. In 2019, researchers examining the volcanic preserved villa of a Pompeian wine merchant found bronze slave tags stamped with Carthaginian makers' marks, but radiocarbon dating proved they'd been manufactured 20 years after Carthage's destruction. Even more damning, the tags' alloy composition matched secret Punic metallurgical formulas for anti-tarnish bronze, a technique Rome hadn't mastered. This wasn't just a scattered operation, it was a self-sustaining web that outlived its creators. The most famous case emerged from decrypted Spartan records. A slave named Mago, supposedly a shipwrecked Cypriot, rose to become advisor to King Cleomenes Roman III. For 17 years he steered Sparta away from alliances with Rome, until a drunken physician noticed his Cypriot had inexplicable knowledge of Carthage's harbor depths. By then Mago had already disappeared, leaving behind a hollowed-out treasury and a Sparta suddenly vulnerable to Roman influence. Rome eventually caught on, but their countermeasures backfired spectacularly. Instead of valuing educated slaves, they began executing any who showed intellect, creating a brain drain that left their own bureaucracy starved of talent. Meanwhile, Carthage's lost agents kept resurfacing. When archaeologists opened a 1st century BCE tomb in Ephesus, they found a freedman's skeleton buried with Carthaginian funerary amulets beside the corpse of his Roman master, whose bones showed traces of the same slow-acting poisons Carthage had famously used in their diplomatic jewelry. Some debts, it seems, took generations to collect. Off the coast of Carthage, where the Mediterranean's turquoise waters meet the horizon, a cluster of unassuming islands hid a revolutionary secret. Each one was man-made, crafted from the bones of sunken warships and the fury of volcanoes. These weren't natural landmasses, but floating fortresses, engineered to dominate trade routes while withstanding storms that would reduce stone castles to rubble. The Carthaginians called them Carphim, the unsinkables, and their construction was a feat of desperation turned into brilliance. After naval defeats left their harbors littered with destroyed vessels, Carthaginian engineers saw an opportunity where others saw wreckage. The process began with salvaged hulls, oak ribs, and cedar planks from shattered triremes, dragged into shallow waters and weighted with volcanic tuff, a porous stone lighter than water when packed with air pockets. Layer by layer they built upward, stacking ships like log cabins, then filling the gaps with a mortar made of crushed seashells and lime that hardened underwater. The result: artificial islands with hollow cores that acted as wave breakers, dissipating storm surges through internal channels. Ancient texts describe how these islands could sway like reeds in hurricanes without breaking apart, while solid rock fortresses crumbled nearby. But the real innovation lay in their dual purpose. Above the waterline, the islands bristled with watchtowers and ballistae, guarding Carthage's lucrative trade routes. Below, their porous structures served as massive fish nurseries, attracting schools of tuna and mackerel that fed both the garrisons and the city's insatiable fish salting industry. Archaeologists diving near these ruins in 2017 made a startling find: ceramic pipes running through the island's cores, designed to circulate seawater and prevent stagnation. This wasn't just military engineering, it was an early example of sustainable aquaculture, where waste from the garrisons fertilized algae that attracted fish, creating a self-sustaining loop. Rome's attempts to replicate these islands ended in costly disasters. Without understanding the buoyancy principles, Roman engineers used dense granite instead of volcanic stone, causing their versions to sink under their own weight. A recovered tablet from Caesar's reign laments the loss of 300 men and 2 years' wages when a Roman artificial island collapsed off Sardinia. Meanwhile, Carthage's original Carfim remained operational for centuries, some repurposed by Byzantine and Arab rulers. The smoking gun, core samples taken from Malta's St. Paul's Island, long assumed to be natural, revealed ship timbers and Carthaginian mortar in 2021, proving it began as one of these forgotten forts. The legacy of these floating strongholds echoes in modern offshore engineering. Dubai's Palm Islands use similar wave dissipation principles, while Norway's fish farming platforms mirror Carthage's aquaculture designs. But perhaps the most telling tribute came from an unexpected source. NASA planetary defense team cited the Carfim as inspiration for proposals to anchor asteroid mining stations using similar buoyant, self-repairing structures. Carthage's genius wasn't just in conquering the seas, but in bending their very physics to human will, turning sunken tragedies into unshakable triumphs. In the dim torchlight of Carthage's Temple of Eshmun, 5 priestesses leaned over a soldier's trembling hands, tracing the lines of his palms like battlefield maps. This wasn't some superstitious ritual, it was military intelligence gathering at its most unorthodox. Before a single sword could be drawn against Syracuse in 310 BCE, Carthage's generals were required to submit their battle plans to the Dream Interpretation Council, a secretive order of priestesses who claimed to channel divine strategy through sleep. Ancient scrolls recovered from the ruins describe how entire campaigns hung in limbo for weeks, while commanders waited for the priestesses to dream the omens favorable. The process was chillingly systematic. Each general would sleep for 3 nights in the temple's sacred chambers, drinking a narcotic brew of mandrake and Libyan honey. Upon waking, their visions were transcribed by scribes onto papyrus scrolls. Every detail, from the color of a bird's wings to the direction blood flowed in imagined battles, was analyzed like cryptographic code. The priestesses then cross-referenced these accounts against a vast archive of past prophetic dreams, searching for recurring symbols that might predict victory or doom. One surviving temple ledger records how a general's dream of drowning in wine delayed the siege of Himera by 19 days, until lunar conditions matched a prior successful campaign where the same omen appeared. Archaeology confirms the staggering influence of this system. Excavations near Syracuse's ancient walls uncovered Carthaginian siege engines abandoned mid-construction, their wooden frames half-carved, as if work stopped abruptly. Dated pottery shards at the site cluster around periods corresponding to Carthage's dream interpretation cycles. Even more telling, Carthage's own military correspondence refers to battle formations as the dream's teeth, with troop placements mirroring the symbolic landscapes described in priestly visions. Rome mocked these practices as war by nightmare, but the results were undeniable. When Carthage finally attacked Syracuse after a priestess dreamed of eagles carrying serpents eastward, they caught the Greek forces off guard during a religious festival, exactly when the dream's imagery suggested. The smoking gun came in 2020, when researchers analyzing charred temple records found lunar calculations proving the council timed the assault to coincide with the eagle migration season, knowing Syracuse's lookouts would dismiss distant birds as natural phenomena. The system's collapse came from its own success. As Carthage's empire grew, the backlog of dream analyses created dangerous delays. A decrypted dispatch from Hannibal's era complains of missing a critical window to sack Rome because the council was still debating whether elephants in dreams signify bridges or betrayal. Yet fragments of the practice survived. Byzantine generals consulted dream books before naval engagements, and even Napoleon reportedly carried a Carthaginian dream symbol guide at Austerlitz. The next time you hesitate because something feels off, remember, you're channeling an ancient Punic instinct to let the subconscious scout the battlefield first. Beneath the smooth curves of every Carthaginian amphora lay an invisible battlefield, a silent war against olive oil counterfeiters that transformed humble pottery into forensic evidence. While rival merchants diluted their oils with cheap nut extracts or doctored the color with saffron, Carthage ceramic workshops quietly embedded authentication codes into the very clay itself. These weren't crude scratches or painted symbols, but microscopic mineral signatures mixed into the slip before firing, deliberate imperfections that only trained inspectors could decode. The system operated like an ancient blockchain. Each pottery district had its unique clay blend, spiked with trace amounts of identifiable metals: copper for leptis magna, zinc for hadrumetum, cobalt for thapsus. But the real genius emerged in the handles. Before attaching them, potters pressed tiny, control break seals into the wet clay, delicate protrusions designed to snap at precise pressure points if the jar was tampered with. A merchant refilling a genuine Carthaginian amphora with inferior oil would inevitably crack this fragile tab, leaving telltale fractures that marketplace inspectors could spot instantly. Archaeologists excavating a Carthaginian customs house in 2016 found the smoking gun, a storeroom filled with hundreds of confiscated amphorae, each sporting identical handle fractures. Chemical analysis revealed something even more damning. The seized jars contained olive oil from 3 different Mediterranean regions, all fraudulently branded as Carthaginian. But the counterfeiters had missed one crucial detail. The authentic amphorae's clay emitted a faint magnetic resonance due to iron-rich local deposits, a property measurable even today with portable scanners. Rome initially mocked these measures as paranoid, until their own markets flooded with fake Italian oils. Desperate to replicate Carthage's system, Roman potters began stamping their amphorae with official seals, an easily forged solution that missed the point entirely. The difference became painfully obvious when Mount Vesuvius preserved both nations' jars side by side in Pompeii's warehouses. Modern X-ray fluorescence shows Carthaginian amphorae maintained consistent mineral fingerprints across decades of production, while Roman vessels vary wildly, proof of widespread counterfeiting. The most ingenious twist came in Carthage's quality control audits. Inspectors would randomly select amphorae from shipments and shatter them to examine the interior clay. Since counterfeiters typically only tampered with the exterior, the inner walls often revealed the true origin through mineral composition. A ledger found in a Carthaginian port administrator's villa details how this method exposed a Sicilian syndicate that had been relabeling Greek oil. Their downfall came when a shattered jar's interior showed none of the telltale iron flecks found in genuine Punic clay. Today's anti-counterfeiting technologies unknowingly echo these ancient practices, from microprinted security threads in modern band notes to the chemical tags used in pharmaceutical packaging. The core principle remains identical: embed verification where forgers least expect it. The next time you check a hologram on a product label, remember, you're participating in a game of cat and mouse that began with Carthaginian potters whispering secrets into wet clay 23 centuries ago. When Carthaginian legions marched into enemy territory, their axes didn't just target forts or storehouses, they sought out the heart of a people's identity, their sacred groves. These weren't mere clusters of trees, but living temples where generations had worshipped, where every rustling leaf was believed to carry divine whispers. The act of destruction was calculated theater. Teams of laborers would strip bark in spirals to ensure slow, agonizing death for ancient oaks, then douse the roots in brine mixed with crushed limestone, a concoction that rendered the soil barren for decades. But the true cruelty lay in the timing. Carthage often staged these desecrations during harvest festivals, ensuring wailing witnesses would carry the trauma back to their villages like a plague. Archaeologists working near former Sicilian battlefields uncovered grim evidence of this tactic. Soil cores taken from raised groves showed sodium chloride levels 10 times higher than surrounding areas, with telltale traces of gypsum, a Carthaginian addition that accelerated salt penetration. Even more chilling, charred offerings still sat atop altar stones, suggesting the groves were torched mid-ceremony. One dig revealed a child's clay votive figurine melted onto a half-felled olive tree, fossilizing the moment of violation. Rome initially dismissed this as barbarism, until they witnessed its psychological impact firsthand. Defeated tribes abandoned strategic hill forts to protect remaining groves, while surrendered warriors begged terms that included sapling replanting rituals. By the Third Punic War, Rome had adopted the practice with terrifying precision. Their siege engineers carried sacks of Sardinian salt specifically for Carthage's temple gardens. The bitter irony: soil analysis at the ruins of Carthage itself reveals Roman salt concentrations mirroring exactly the formulas Carthage had used in Sicily a century earlier. The genius and horror of this strategy lay in its multi-generational damage. Sacred groves weren't just spiritually significant, they were ecological cornerstones preventing soil erosion and retaining groundwater. Their destruction triggered famine cycles that outlasted the wars themselves. Modern satellite surveys show former Carthaginian battle zones still bearing treeless scars, while core samples from cursed groves contain pollen records abruptly ending at invasion dates. Carthage didn't just conquer land, they rewrote ecosystems, turning living cathedrals into warnings etched into the earth itself. When Byzantine monks later planted cypress saplings over salted Sicilian groves, the trees grew stunted, their roots recoiling from the poisoned subsoil nature's memory, outlasting even the empire that wielded the salt like a sword. The pantheon of Carthage didn't just grow, it evolved like a living organism, swallowing entire celestial hierarchies whole. When Carthaginian armies conquered a new territory, priests didn't arrive with torches to burn foreign temples. They came with clay tablets and census takers, meticulously cataloging local deities as if taking inventory of a spiritual marketplace. This wasn't mere tolerance, it was a calculated strategy of celestial annexation, where every absorbed god became another thread binding conquered peoples to Carthage's empire. Take the conquest of Sardinia in the 5th century BCE. The island's indigenous Neuragic people worshipped a water god named Sardis Pater in sacred wells. Instead of erasing him, Carthaginian priests declared him a long-lost cousin of their own sea god, Yam, crafting elaborate fusion myths where the two deities shared a mythical battle against a common serpent enemy. Overnight, Sardinian priests found themselves promoted to junior officiants in Carthage's state religion, their holy wells now adorned with Punic inscriptions honoring Yam Sardis. Rebellious, why fight when your god now draws his power from the conqueror's pantheon? Archaeological evidence reveals the brilliance of this theological diplomacy. Excavations at Sardinia's Monte Surai sanctuary show a sudden architectural hybridity: Neuragic stone altars topped with Carthaginian bronze censers, votive offerings stacked in layers reflecting both traditions. Even more telling, isotope analysis of sacrificial animal bones proves Sardinians began importing North African rams for rituals rather than using local stock, physically tethering their worship to Carthage's economic networks. Compare this to Rome's heavy-handed approach with the same territory a century later. Roman governors famously mocked Sardinian religion as well worship for simpletons, provoking constant uprisings. Carthage's absorption method proved so effective that Alexander the Great borrowed it wholesale during his Persian campaign, rebranding Ahura Mazda as Zeus Oromazes to legitimize his rule. The Macedonian king's personal historian, Callisthenes, openly admitted the tactic's Carthaginian origins in lost scrolls later quoted by Strabo, calling it the Punic trick of making gods into allies. The most ingenious twist lay in Carthage's layered worship system. Conquered peoples could keep their surface-level rituals, while Carthage controlled the deeper symbolism. Iberian moon goddess Noctiluca became merely an aspect of Tanit, her silver crescent now framing Carthage's paramount deity. Libyan storm god Gurzil got recast as Baal Hammon's battlefield herald. This celestial sleight of hand created what modern anthropologists call hierarchical syncretism, the divine pecking order where foreign gods always answered to Carthage's central pantheon. A smoking gun emerged in 2022 when linguists deciphered a bilingual stele from Cyprus. On the surface, it showed Phoenician Melkart and Greek Heracles as equals. But ultraviolet imaging revealed earlier Punic text beneath, listing Heracles as Melkart's sworn shield-bearer. The stone had been carefully repurposed when Greek sentiment required diplomatic parity, proof of Carthage's elastic theology bending to political needs. Rome eventually adopted this strategy too late, clumsily equating Jupiter with every local sky god from Gaul to Egypt, but Carthage's original system held one key advantage. By allowing absorbed deities to retain unique festival dates and minor rites, they created the illusion of continuity while subtly redirecting loyalty. Modern parallels abound, from how Christianity absorbed pagan solstice celebrations to multinational corporations retaining local brand identities after buyouts. The next time you see a global fast food menu tweaked for regional tastes, remember, you're witnessing the ghost of Carthage's divine mergers and acquisitions, where conquest wore the mask of inclusion. While Rome's ships slowed to a crawl under the weight of barnacles and marine growth, Carthaginian vessels sliced through the waves with unnerving speed, their hulls mysteriously immune to the clinging parasites that plagued other fleets. The secret wasn't divine favor or superior craftsmanship, but a viscous black brew bubbling in hidden coastal workshops, a pine tar formula so potent it repelled sea life for years with a single application. This wasn't just waterproofing, it was biochemical warfare against nature itself. Carthage shipyards operated like alchemical laboratories. Workers distilled resin from Atlas mountain pines using clay retorts that concentrated the sap's natural toxins, then blended it with fermented fig sap and powdered oyster shells. The resulting tar formed an acidic barrier that burned barnacle larvae on contact while remaining harmless to wood. Ancient accounts describe how freshly coated ships would steam as they hit the water, the tar reacting with seawater to emit a faint sulfuric haze that further deterred marine growth. Modern marine biologists replicating the recipe in 2018 found ships treated with Carthaginian tar accumulated 87% fewer barnacles than untreated hulls after 12 months, a staggering advantage in an era where fouling could reduce a warship's speed by half. The genius lay in the application technique. Rather than simply brushing on tar like rival navies, Carthaginian crews used heated bronze rollers to impregnate the wood fibers, creating a deep reservoir that slowly released toxins over time. Divers exploring a 2,000-year-old shipwreck off Sicily in 2016 made a startling discovery even after centuries underwater. The hull's lower planks showed no marine growth in precise stripes where the tar had been applied. Chemical analysis revealed why. The residue still contained trace amounts of capsaicin from African bird peppers, an ingredient Carthage sailors had kept secret by listing it in ledgers as demon's breath. Rome's desperate attempts to copy the formula read like comedy. Without access to North Africa's unique pine strains, they substituted Italian fir resin, producing a sticky mess that attracted more barnacles than it repelled. A recovered Roman naval memo from 150 BCE complains of ships returning from patrols, slow as pregnant whales, their hulls grotesquely encrusted after mere months. The difference came down to chemistry. Carthage's pine species contained high levels of abiotic acid, a natural anti-fouling agent, while Mediterranean varieties lacked the critical compound. The recipe's destruction during Carthage's fall became one of antiquity's great technological losses. As Roman soldiers breached the city's naval archives, Carthaginian chemists reportedly burned their tar formula scrolls in the very vats used to brew the substance, filling the streets with acrid black smoke. Pliny the Elder later claimed attempts to recreate the tar from memory produced a substance that peeled like sunburnt skin. After weeks at sea, the smoking gun emerged in 2020 when linguists deciphered a charred scrap from the ruins of a Punic workshop, a partial ingredient list specifying lunar cycles for resin harvesting, proving the formula's precision extended even to timing. Today's marine coatings still echo Carthage's innovation. Modern anti-fouling paints use copper particles in much the same way Carthage used oyster shell powder, while the controlled release principle of their tar lives on in polymer-based hull treatments. Yet no synthetic compound has matched the longevity of that ancient recipe, a humbling reminder that sometimes the past holds secrets even our best science can't quite replicate. When conservationists recently applied a replica of the Punic tar to a reconstructed trireme, they observed barnacles actively recoiling from treated planks, as if the ghosts of Carthage's chemists had briefly reclaimed their dominion over the waves. The gates of a besieged Numidian fortress creaked open at dusk, not to surrender, but to release something far more terrifying: a dozen emaciated lions, their ribs pressing against tawny hides, their eyes burning with a hunger sharpened by 3 days of deliberate starvation. This wasn't careless cruelty, it was psychological warfare engineered to perfection. Carthaginian commanders had discovered a grim truth: a starving lion didn't just kill, it paralyzed entire cities with dread. Ancient scrolls recovered from the ruins of Cirta describe how these beasts, driven mad by the scent of unguarded livestock and human sweat, would scale makeshift barricades and prowl alleyways with unnatural persistence, their roars echoing off stone walls like spectral warnings. The tactic's brilliance lay in its layered horror. Unlike predictable human attackers, lions couldn't be reasoned with or bribed. They struck at random, dragging sentries from watchtowers under cover of darkness, ambushing water carriers at dawn. Numidian records from the siege of Thugger recount how defenders abandoned entire sections of the walls rather than face the animals, allowing Carthaginian sappers to advance unchecked. But the real damage was psychological. After just 5 nights of lion incursions, a witness described defenders huddling in temple courtyards, their spears trembling not at men, but at shadows that moved like liquid gold. Forensic evidence confirms the calculated brutality. Excavations at Thugga's eastern gate uncovered lion skeletons with filed-down canines, a Carthaginian practice to prolong victim suffering by preventing clean kills. Nearby, archaeologists found human remains bearing distinctive claw marks angled upward, suggesting the beasts had learned to exploit the height difference when pouncing on crouching defenders. Even more chilling, soil analysis revealed traces of fermented fish paste in the animals' dens, a Carthaginian trick to sharpen aggression by triggering predatory instincts. Rome initially dismissed the tactic as barbaric, until they witnessed its effectiveness firsthand at the siege of Aspes. A recovered Roman officer's dispatch describes how the mere rumor of approaching lions caused an entire cohort to abandon their posts, triggering a domino effect of desertions. By the Second Punic War, Rome had adopted a cruder version, using captured circus lions but without Carthage's meticulous starvation protocols. The animals often lacked the same relentless drive. The difference came down to neuroscience. Prolonged hunger amplifies big cats' territorial aggression. a fact Carthaginian handlers exploited by timing releases to coincide with lunar cycles when prey drive peaks. Modern military psychologists recognize this as the earliest documented use of non-human psychological terror. The lions weren't just weapons, they were chaos agents, dismantling unit cohesion and eroding morale in ways arrows and siege engines couldn't. Contemporary accounts from Numidian survivors speak of veterans who later startled at housecat noises or refused to eat meat, trauma responses eerily similar to modern PTSD. Carthage's real innovation wasn't the lions themselves, but the understanding that fear, when properly weaponized, could conquer cities without firing a single shot. The tactic's legacy echoes in unexpected places. During World War II, Soviet forces trained anti-tank dogs to seek food under German panzers, a crude parallel to Carthage's starvation principle. Even today, the U.S. military studies animal behavior for unconventional warfare, though ethical constraints keep such research theoretical. But perhaps the most haunting evidence of Carthage's psychological mastery lies in a tiny ivory carving from Thuga, depicting a lion with a human face, a terrified defender's attempt to rationalize the horror by giving it familiar features. In that artifact we see the true power of siege animal psychology. It didn't just break walls, it broke minds. When Hannibal's war chest ran dangerously low during his march through the Alps, his quartermasters didn't panic. They reached for the one financial trick that kept his armies fed while Rome's treasury bled dry. Carthage silver coins gleamed with deceptive purity in the Mediterranean sun, their surfaces flawless mirrors of wealth, but beneath that untarnished facade lay a secret alloy mixture, 20% copper blended so expertly with silver that only the most skilled money changers could detect the difference. This wasn't counterfeiting, it was monetary alchemy on an industrial scale, allowing Carthage to mint 3 coins for the price of 2 while maintaining the illusion of full value. The genius lay in the metallurgical sleight of hand. Carthaginian silversmiths developed a quenching technique where freshly struck coins were plunged into diluted seawater, creating a surface layer of nearly pure silver through chemical migration. Contemporary accounts describe how merchants would bite coins to test purity, a test Carthage's currency passed effortlessly, as the outer layer was genuinely soft precious metal. But cross-section coins recovered from Hannibal's campaign trail tell the true story. Their cores reveal a rose-gold hue where the copper concentration peaked, a hidden reinforcement that made the coins far more durable than pure silver. Archaeologists examining hoards near Lake Trasimene found Carthaginian coins still intact after 2 millennia in damp soil, while contemporary Roman denarii from the same digs had crumbled into green powder. Rome's mints eventually uncovered the deception, but their clumsy attempts to replicate it backfired spectacularly. Without Carthage's precise temperature controls during alloy mixing, Roman silver-copper blends separated unevenly, creating coins that tarnished patchy red, earning them the derisive nickname, painted money, in Greek trade logs. The real stroke of Carthaginian brilliance, they calibrated the copper percentage to regional standards. Coins bound for Celtic territories contained slightly more copper, knowing the tribes valued durability over purity, while coins for Greek markets leaned heavier on silver to satisfy their aesthetic demands. A recovered ledger from Capua details how Hannibal's paymasters adjusted soldier wages based on these regional variants. Celtic mercenaries received thicker, copper-rich coins that felt substantial in hand, while Greek officers got finer silver-heavy pieces that shone brighter. Modern metallurgists recreating the alloy in 2018 made an astonishing discovery. The exact 20% copper blend Carthage used happens to maximize coin hardness with minimal thermal expansion, preventing cracks during temperature swings. This explains why Carthaginian currency remained trustworthy even as it crossed the Alps, while Roman coins often fractured in cold weather. The most damning evidence of this system's effectiveness lies in the economics. By the time Hannibal reached the gates of Rome, His devalued coinage had effectively doubled Carthage's military spending power. A single chest of these alloyed coins could buy what would have required 2 chests of pure silver, all because some anonymous Punic metallurgist realized value isn't just measured in purity, but in perception and durability. The legacy of this monetary manipulation echoes in our wallets today. Modern quarters and dimes use nearly identical copper-silver ratios for the same practical reasons, while digital payment systems grapple with the age-old question Carthage answered centuries ago: how to create perceived value from fundamentally altered materials. Next time you flip a coin, look closely at its edge, that thin copper stripe running through modern silver-colored coins. It's the unbroken thread leading back to Hannibal's war chest, where financial innovation became as vital a weapon as any sword. At the heart of Carthage's legendary harbor, a whispering gallery of curved stone walls turned human speech into a weapon of coordination. Picture a fleet commander standing on the central quay, his voice effortlessly reaching sailors hundreds of feet away without shouting, not through magic, but through physics perfected. The harbor's concentric rings weren't just for docking ships, they were a massive acoustic amplifier, bouncing commands off parabolic walls with such precision that even the lightest utterance carried to the outermost vessels. Modern engineers analyzing the ruins discovered the walls followed a precise curvature 15 degrees of inward tilt that created overlapping sound waves, effectively turning the entire harbor into a natural megaphone. This wasn't just about convenience. During nighttime maneuvers or sudden storms, when visual signals failed, Carthaginian admirals could coordinate complex fleet movements through voice commands alone. A recovered training manual from the ruins describes how young officers practiced vowel elongation against the walls, learning to modulate their speech for maximum resonance. The harbor's acoustics were so finely tuned that certain syllables would travel farther. Linguists found Punic commands like ramish, turn, and door, hold, contained frequencies perfectly matched to the wall's reflective properties. Rome's attempts to replicate this technology revealed just how advanced Carthage's understanding was. When the Romans built their first naval base at Ostia, they copied the curved design, but missed the subtle gradations in stone density that allowed Carthage's walls to filter out wave noise. The result, a harbor where shouts dissolved into echoes, creating chaos during emergencies. The smoking gun emerged in 2019, when sonar scans of Carthage's submerged walls revealed alternating layers of limestone and volcanic tuff, a sandwich pattern that absorbed disruptive low-frequency sounds while enhancing human vocal ranges. The true tragedy lies in how this knowledge vanished. Medieval shipyards abandoned curved designs for straight walls, dismissing Carthage's acoustics as pagan trickery. It wasn't until the 16th century that Venetian architects rediscovered the principle, using whispering galleries in the Doge's palace to eavesdrop on prisoners. Today, the same physics powers everything from satellite dishes to concert halls, yet few realize the blueprint first emerged from a North African harbor where commanders once turned whispers into fleet-wide orders. The stones may be silent now, but their legacy echoes in every modern structure designed to bend sound to human will. Smoke coiled over Carthage's sacred burial hills in deliberate hues, not the hazy gray of ordinary pyres, but vivid, pigmented plumes that stained the horizon like a painter's brushstrokes. This was no accidental byproduct of combustion. It was a meticulously engineered language of ash and status, where the very color of one's funeral smoke declared their legacy to watching cities 50 kilometers distant. For Carthage's elite, death wasn't the end of influence, it was a final, unignorable proclamation. The process began with alchemical precision. Mourners layered the funeral pyre with specific resins and minerals, ground lapis lazuli for merchants' funerals, producing an inky black smoke that clung to the sky like storm clouds, powdered murex shells mixed with iron oxide for generals, creating a regal violet streak visible even at sea. But the true innovation lay in the airflow channels, clay ducts built into the pyr's base that controlled oxygen flow, ensuring colors burned pure rather than muddling into brown. Excavations near Carthage's burial mounds uncovered these ceramic vents still intact, their interiors stained with centuries-old pigment residue that matched descriptions in Punic funeral scrolls. Roman historians mocked the practice as vanity beyond the grave, until they witnessed its strategic utility firsthand. During Hannibal's campaigns, opposing forces reported seeing purple smoke columns rise from distant hills, a signal that Carthage had lost a commander, but also a psychological weapon. The lingering plumes reminded enemies that even in death, Punic warriors demanded attention. One recovered Greek mercenary's diary describes panicked troops interpreting black smoke near a supply route as proof Carthaginian merchants had died defending it, sparking rumors of hidden wealth worth dying for. Archaeology confirms how deeply this tradition was embedded in Carthaginian society. At the ruins of Circaean, a funerary workshop was discovered with labeled jars of pigments, each batch tested on small clay altars, their surfaces scorched from trial burns. The most telling find, a set of weights carved in the shape of different smoke colors, used to measure resin portions to the gram. This wasn't ceremonial improvisation, it was a standardized industrial process, as regulated as coin minting or shipbuilding. Modern recreations reveal the engineering brilliance behind these signals. Using Punic formulas, chemists in 2021 produced smoke plumes visible from 48 kilometers, just shy of ancient claims, until they accounted for Carthage's clearer prehistoric air. The pigment's particle size proved crucial: too fine and the smoke dissipated, too coarse and it fell like rain. Carthaginian alchemists had somehow calibrated this perfectly without microscopes, likely using sedimentation techniques where pigments were suspended in water and harvested at precise intervals. The tradition's abrupt end speaks to its cultural potency. When Rome razed Carthage, they specifically targeted burial hills with catapults, scattering the pigment stockpiles. Yet the idea refused to die. Byzantine emperors later adopted colored smoke for imperial funerals, and Renaissance Venice used similar techniques during state ceremonies. Today, when fireworks paint the sky with deliberate hues during national memorials, they're unknowingly channeling a 2,000-year-old Punic innovation, the art of making death itself a medium for messages that outlast stone monuments. The smoke may fade, but the memory of those who shaped history lingers like pigment on the wind. Beneath the waves of Carthage's legendary harbors, a silent revolution in engineering, lurked walls that defied erosion while Roman copies crumbled into the sea. The secret wasn't some lost alchemy, but a startlingly simple ingredient: vinegar. Carthaginian builders discovered that mixing volcanic ash with fermented fruit vinegar created a concrete so durable, modern scientists are still unraveling its mysteries. While Rome struggled with saltwater corrosion, Carthage's vinegar-treated structures grew stronger with each passing century, their atomic structure subtly evolving under the Mediterranean's relentless tides. The process began with volcanic ash harvested from Mount Etna's slopes, rich in pozzolanic minerals that react chemically with liquids, but instead of using plain seawater like their Roman counterparts, Carthaginian engineers steeped the ash in vinegar for weeks before mixing. This acidic bath triggered a molecular transformation, breaking down silica and alumina bonds just enough to make them receptive to a second reaction when submerged. Modern electron microscopy reveals why this mattered. Vinegar-treated concrete forms needle-like crystals that interlock like microscopic armor, while Roman concrete formed crumbly, rounded clusters. A recovered Punic construction manual from the ruins of Tharos details the exact vinegar-to-ash ratios, specifying apple cider vinegar for underwater foundations and date vinegar for exposed seawalls, a nuance Rome never grasped. Divers exploring Carthage's sunken harbor walls in 2018 made a jaw-dropping discovery. Core samples showed the 2,000-year-old concrete had developed a self-healing property: tiny cracks filled with a gel-like substance over time. Lab analysis identified it as calcium acetate, a byproduct of the vinegar reaction that swells when exposed to moisture, sealing fractures automatically. Meanwhile, Roman concrete from the same era exhibited catastrophic spalling, their surfaces pockmarked by salt crystallization. The difference wasn't just longevity, it was an entirely different philosophy of material science. Carthage didn't just build for their generation, they built for eternity. Rome's attempts to steal this technology ended in farce. Captured Carthaginian masons were forced to teach their techniques, but without access to specific Sicilian volcanic ash or the patience for vinegar curing, Roman engineers produced brittle imitations. Pliny the Elder grumbled in his journals about Punic concrete that refuses to fail, while Roman ports required constant repairs. The smoking gun, a shipwreck found off Sardinia in 2021, carried amphorae labeled Carthago acidum, Carthaginian vinegar, alongside volcanic ash, a doomed attempt to replicate the recipe far from its geographic roots. Today, scientists and media are racing to recreate this ancient innovation for modern seawalls. Their experiments prove vinegar's acetic acid dissolves just enough aluminum from volcanic ash to form ultra-stable hydrotalcite crystals, something modern Portland cement can't replicate. The most poetic validation came in 2023, when a test block of vinegar concrete submerged in Boston Harbor emerged pristine after a brutal winter, while conventional concrete alongside it disintegrated. As climate change threatens coastal cities, Carthage's 2 millennia-old answer to rising seas might yet have its day again, proof that some solutions aren't invented, but rediscovered. Buried beneath the shifting sands of Tunisia, a cracked limestone slab tells a story that rewrites everything we thought we knew about ancient warfare economics. This wasn't some royal decree or religious edict, it was a mercenary's pay stub, etched with meticulous precision. Carthage didn't just hire soldiers, they built the Mediterranean's first performance-based military compensation system, complete with injury severance and combat bonuses. Imagine a world where an archer's accuracy or a cavalryman's kill count translated directly into silver, not through some chieftain's whim, but according to standardized tables chiseled in stone for all to see. The tablet's left column lists roles: Libyan skirmishers, Balearic slingers, Numidian horse archers, each with base pay denoted in shekels, but the real innovation appears in the right margin: adjustments for excellence. A Numidian rider received double for every enemy horse captured intact, while Cretan archers earned escalating bonuses for hits at different ranges. Modern historians ran the numbers and realized a top-performing Carthaginian mercenary could out-earn a Roman centurion by 30%. Even injuries came with compensation tiers: losing a finger in battle paid 5 shekels, but an eye was worth 20, calibrated to the permanent impact on combat effectiveness. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its fairness, but its psychological brilliance. Discoveries at the ancient mercenary camp of Sicca Veneria revealed identical pay tables posted at training grounds, transparency unheard of in other armies. Archery butts were found with notches counting successful hits, suggesting soldiers literally kept score of their earnings potential. Rome's attempt to replicate this with crude donatives, gold handouts after victories, paled in comparison. The difference: Carthage's mercenaries fought like entrepreneurs, knowing exactly how each arrow or cavalry charge translated into tangible rewards. Forensic accounting of recovered pay stubs shows the system's sophistication. One mercenary's ledger from the First Punic War details 17 separate bonuses across 3 campaigns, including a peculiar storm premium for naval fighters who maintained accuracy in rough seas. The tables even accounted for regional economics. Balearic slingers received part payment in lead for ammunition, while Gauls could opt for wine rations instead of silver. This wasn't payroll, it was behavioral economics weaponized 2 millennia before Wall Street existed. the ultimate proof of its effectiveness lies in desertion rates. While Roman legions constantly dealt with AWOL soldiers, Carthage's mercenary forces showed remarkable stability even during Hannibal's grueling Alpine crossing. A recently decrypted officer's letter found near Capua explains why one cavalry squadron voluntarily postponed pay disbursement until after a critical battle, confident their performance multipliers would triple their earnings. Try finding that level of buy-in from conscripted legionnaires. Modern militaries still grapple with these principles. The U.S. Army's recent experiments with performance pay for specialized units show striking parallels right down to the controversy over quantifying combat effectiveness. Yet Carthage solved this 23 centuries ago with nothing more than stone tablets and an understanding of human motivation as sharp as the swords their mercenaries wielded. The next time you see a sales commission structure or corporate bonus scheme, remember, the blueprint wasn't forged in some Silicon Valley boardroom, but in the dust and blood of Punic war camps, where every shekel was a silent commander driving men to impossible feats. On certain nights when the moon vanished from Carthage skies, it wasn't just an astronomical event, it was a psychological weapon, meticulously timed by Punic priests wielding clay tablets filled with celestial math. These temple astronomers had unlocked a terrifying advantage, the 19-year metonic cycle, which allowed them to predict lunar eclipses down to the hour, centuries before Greek or Roman scholars achieved similar accuracy. While other cultures cowered at the disappearing moon, Carthage's generals seized these moments to strike with calculated cruelty, turning cosmic coincidence into battlefield supremacy. The system's precision still stuns modern scholars. Excavated temple records from Carthage's Hill of Biasur reveal columns of cuneiform noting eclipse patterns dating back to 800 BCE data, painstakingly cross-referenced with military campaigns. One tablet from the Sicilian Wars chillingly records, "In the third month when the moon dies in Scorpio, the Syracusans will drop their swords to clutch amulets." Sure enough, Greek historians describe a night attack during a blood-red eclipse in 310 BCE, when Carthaginian forces slaughtered panic-stricken defenders who believed the gods had abandoned them. What made Carthage's eclipse warfare so devastating was its layered deception. Priests didn't just track the cycles, they enhanced the terror. Before battles timed to celestial events, spies would spread rumors that Carthage's god Baal Hammon ate the moon to punish enemies. Then as the eclipse unfolded, silver-voiced heralds hidden among the troops would mimic divine voices from the darkness. A recovered Greek mercenary's diary recounts hearing what he thought was Zeus roaring from the heavens, only to realize too late it was a Carthaginian soldier blowing into a conch shell from a hillside cave, perfectly synchronized with the moon's vanishing. Rome initially dismissed these tactics as primitive superstition until the Battle of Lake Trasimene. Hannibal deliberately engaged on the eve of a partial eclipse, knowing Roman troops would misinterpret the dimming light as impending storms. As legionnaires hesitated to don rain gear, Carthaginian cavalry struck under the eerie half-light. Polybius' account describes confused Romans tripping over their own cloaks, while Hannibal's eclipse-briefed forces moved with unnerving purpose. Archaeology confirms how deeply this knowledge was guarded. A 2022 dig at Kirkuane uncovered an astronomer's toolkit, a bronze goniometer for measuring lunar angles, and 19 knotted cords representing the metonic cycle. Most revealing, charred residue on the instrument suggests they were destroyed deliberately when Rome conquered Carthage, denying enemies this celestial advantage. Today, NASA eclipse predictions align almost exactly with Carthage's ancient calculations, proof that some shadows stretching across time aren't omens, but the fingerprints of a civilization that saw the sky not as mystery, but as a weapon waiting to be unsheathed. Every Carthaginian trading post from the rocky coasts of Iberia to the lush Nile Delta hid a secret more valuable than spices or silks, rows of unassuming clay jars filled with thick, bitter pastes that could mean the difference between life and death. These weren't trade goods, they were strategic reserves of antidotes for the deadliest regional poisons, meticulously curated and dispensed with calculated generosity. A merchant bitten by a desert viper in Libya, a chieftain's son suffering from tainted shellfish in Sardinia, all found salvation in Carthage's sprawling network of healing houses, where cures flowed as freely as wine, provided you pledged loyalty to the providers. The system thrived on Carthage's unrivaled knowledge of toxicology. Each outpost maintained antidote kits tailored to local threats: milky antiaris sap for arrow poisons in Numidia, dried sea hair glands for toxic fish in the Balearics, even rare dictamnus root for Cretan assassins' blade coatings. But the real power lay in the standardization sealed amphorae with dosage markings in universal Punic symbols, allowing even illiterate tribesmen to administer treatments. Excavations at a Sicilian trading post in 2021 uncovered a trove of these jars, their interiors still coated with residue matching poison types found in local flora. One label, translated via multispectral imaging, read, 2 fingers width for scorpion, 3 for serpent, never after moonrise when the humors shift. Rome scoffed at these apothecary shops until their own generals started dying mysteriously. A recovered letter from a Roman garrison commander in Corsica panics about losing 3 officers to suspected poisoning, lamenting that the local Carthaginian emporium suddenly required tribute in iron before releasing antidotes. This was no accident. Carthage healers deliberately embedded dependency by introducing subtle toxins into regional food chains. Archaeologists found lead tablets near Leptis Magna documenting how traders would gift new crops like bitter vetch to tribal leaders, knowing the improperly prepared seeds caused paralysis treatable only with Carthaginian antidotes. The genius of this system wasn't just in creating reliance, but in its plausible deniability. When a Massilian diplomat accused Carthage of poisoning wells, Punic merchants arrived with humanitarian antidote shipments, while quietly spreading rumors of a plague sent by angry spirits. Forensic analysis of bones near trading posts reveals the chilling truth. Communities using Carthaginian cures showed traces of preventive low-dose toxins in their systems, ensuring they'd need regular antidote top-ups. Modern parallels abound, from pharmaceutical patents creating lifelong medication dependencies to tech companies deliberately designing fragile ecosystems. The shadow of Carthage's model lingers. But perhaps the most telling artifact sits in a Tunisian museum, a broken amphora stamped with both a healing caduceus and a worship, its dual purpose laid bare. Medicine and manipulation, blended as smoothly as the antivenins that flowed from Carthage's jars, proving that sometimes the surest way to control an enemy isn't to kill them but to make sure they can't live without you. While Roman generals relied on vulnerable supply lines stretched across hostile territory, Carthage waged war with fields, not just swords. During Hannibal's grueling 15-year Sicilian campaign, his armies never starved, not because of supply caravans, but because the land itself had been weaponized through a brutal agricultural innovation: siege crop rotations. Picture this: months before troops even arrived, Carthaginian agents disguised as farmers would infiltrate target regions, planting staggered fields of barley, chickpeas, and drought-resistant millet in concentric rings around enemy cities. Each crop was carefully timed to ripen precisely when siege engines rolled into position, turning the surrounding countryside into a self-replenishing larder. The system's brilliance lay in its ruthless efficiency. Unlike Rome's grain convoys, which required constant protection, these hidden farms required no guards. They were indistinguishable from local agriculture until harvest time. Ancient scrolls recovered from a Sicilian grain silo detail how Carthage's farmer soldiers used lunar agriculture techniques to synchronize planting. Fast-growing barley would mature first, feeding troops during initial encirclement. Chickpeas, planted slightly later in adjacent fields, provided protein-rich forage as sieges dragged into months. The outermost rings held hardy millet, a fallback crop that could survive trampling and still yield edible seeds. Modern satellite imaging of ancient battlefields confirms this geometric planting. Soil analysis shows nitrogen spikes in concentric patterns matching Carthage described harvest rings. But the real innovation was psychological. By controlling the food supply just beyond city walls, Hannibal turned starving defenders into witnesses of abundance. Sicilian accounts describe besieged populations watching helplessly as Carthaginian troops feasted on roasted chickpeas within arrow range, the smoke of cooking fires carrying the scent of meals they couldn't reach. Some garrisons reportedly mutinied when their grain stores ran low, unable to endure the spectacle of enemy soldiers harvesting fresh crops while they ate boiled leather. Archaeology reveals how calculated this torment was. Excavations near Syracuse uncovered Carthaginian grain pits lined with bitter almond leaves, a natural insect repellent that preserved supplies for years. Even more telling, pollen analysis shows millet planted along likely retreat routes, ensuring Hannibal's forces could pursue fleeing enemies while living off the land. Rome eventually adopted a crude version of this strategy during the Gallic Wars, but their rigid planting schedules failed to account for regional climate variations. Carthage's system succeeded because it was hyper-local, with seed varieties and planting depths adjusted mile by mile based on soil samples taken years in advance. The most damning evidence of this strategy's effectiveness lies in what didn't survive. While Roman military archives overflow with requests for emergency grain shipments, Carthage's records show eerie silences during prolonged sieges, no desperate pleas for supplies, because the supplies were growing silently beneath enemy watchtowers. A fragmentary ledger from Lilybaeum lists not weapons or reinforcements, but 20 Libyan ploughmen disguised as vine dressers, sent ahead of the army. These unlikely warriors may have done more damage than any battering ram, their hoes and seed bags carving invisible trenches of hunger around resisting cities. Today, as modern militaries develop living off the land doctrines for protracted conflicts, they're unknowingly reviving a playbook written in Punic, not Latin, where conquest begins not with a sword thrust, but with a seed buried in secret. Carthage's admirals didn't just navigate by stars and currents, they consulted living tide charts pulsing beneath their ships, while rival fleets blundered into gelatinous nightmares of stinging jellyfish swarms. Carthaginian vessels slipped through the Mediterranean's deadliest seasons unscathed, thanks to a clandestine program merging naval strategy with marine biology. Their secret weapon, a network of enslaved Sicilian sponge divers turned ecological spies, trained to track jellyfish migrations with the precision of military scouts. These divers weren't just observing, they were mapping. By recording bloom patterns in coded logs, carving symbols into lead tablets sunk at specific coordinates, they created the ancient world's first predictive model of toxic swarms. A recovered diver's journal from the ruins of Lilybaeum details how moon phases correlated with jellyfish movements. When Selene is full, the white ghosts gather west of the shoals, their tendrils thick as rigging ropes. Carthaginian navigators used these logs to plot alternate routes, steering clear of areas where Pelagia noctiluca, the luminous purple stinger, massed in suffocating numbers. Modern marine biologists confirmed the accuracy by overlaying these ancient records with satellite data. The migrations haven't shifted in 2 millennia. But Carthage didn't stop at avoidance. They weaponized the data. During the Battle of the Aegates Islands, they herded Roman ships into pre-identified jellyfish corridors using decoy fishing boats, knowing the enemy's leather-clad oarsmen would be crippled by stings while Carthage's oil-coated crews rode through unharmed. Excavated Roman triremes tell the story. Their hulls still bear crusty remnants of jellyfish mucus in patterns matching known swarm densities, the real stroke of genius. Carthage divers also identified symbiotic safe zones. By tracking dolphin pods that preyed on jellyfish, they discovered pockets of clear water invisible to outsiders. A recovered admiral's map from Mahdia shows dolphin icons marking these sanctuaries, allowing Carthaginian fleets to regroup in enemy territory where rivals feared to follow. Rome's attempts to replicate this failed spectacularly. Their divers, lacking systematic training, misinterpreted seasonal blooms as random events. Today, the U.S. Navy studies jellyfish migrations to protect coastal bases, while marine ecologists cite Carthage's logs as the earliest example of human-animal battlefield coordination. Yet few realize this ecological warfare began with enslaved men holding their breath in the dark, reading the sea's invisible ink as empires clashed above them. When Greek fire first erupted across Mediterranean battlefields, most ships stood defenseless, their tar-coated sails igniting like tinder, trapping crews in floating infernos. But Carthage's vessels cut through the flames unharmed, their sails billowing defiantly against walls of fire. The secret wasn't magic, but geology, vast deposits of white asbestos mined from the Libyan desert, woven into fabric so eerily fire-resistant that even Roman historians described it as cloth that laughed at flames. The process began in the scorching valleys of Cyrenaica, where Carthaginian miners chiseled fibrous serpentine rock from cliffs, its silky strands flexible enough to spin yet impervious to heat. Artisans then carded the asbestos fibers with North African cotton, creating a hybrid fabric that retained the tensile strength of linen while shrugging off temperatures that would melt bronze. A recovered shipwright's manual from the ruins of Carthage details the exact weaving technique: diagonal twill patterns spaced precisely 3 finger widths apart, allowing sails to expand and contract without fraying under sudden heat stress. What made this innovation revolutionary wasn't just the material, but its application in naval warfare. During the Battle of Cape Hermium, Carthaginian quinquiremes deliberately sailed through Greek fire barrages, emerging unscathed while enemy arrows tipped with flaming pitch bounced harmlessly from their sails. Modern recreations prove why. Thermal imaging shows Carthage's asbestos blend distributed heat so evenly that no single spot reached combustion temperature, while conventional sails ignited within seconds. Rome's attempts to replicate this failed catastrophically. Without access to Libyan asbestos veins, they experimented with inferior substitutes, layering clay between sailcloth or soaking fabric in alum solutions, but these cracked in storms or washed away in rain. The smoking gun, a sunken Roman warship near Sicily, contained fragments of a half-burned sail riddled with asbestos fibers, traced via mineral fingerprinting to stolen Carthaginian stockpiles. Even in theft, Rome couldn't match the original craftsmanship. The true tragedy lies in how this knowledge vanished. When Carthage fell, the intricate weaving techniques perished with its artisans, while the asbestos mines were abandoned as sorcerer's stone. For nearly 2 millennia, navies suffered catastrophic fire losses until 18th century, Europeans rediscovered asbestos properties, unaware they were simply relearning what Punic sailmakers had perfected centuries earlier. Today, when firefighters don heat-resistant gear, they're wearing the distant descendant of sails that once billowed defiantly through Greek fire, their secrets buried like embers waiting to be reignited. In the bustling ports of ancient Carthage, trade agreements weren't just written, they were trapped in linguistic labyrinths. Merchants from Greece, Egypt, Iberia, and beyond would unroll contracts they believed were fair, unaware that Carthage scribes had embedded secret nullifications in plain sight. These weren't simple translations, they were legal minefields, with clauses shifting meaning between languages like quicksand. One particularly devious tablet, recovered from a shipwreck off Sardinia, bears identical promises in Greek, Egyptian hieratic, Etruscan, and Latin, but the final lines, etched in cramped Punic script along the edge, contain a single phrase that renders the entire agreement void if Carthage's profit margins dip below 20%. The genius of this system lay in its plausible deniability. Carthaginian negotiators would enthusiastically point to favorable terms in the buyer's native language, even as their own copy written in Punic included escape hatches invisible to outsiders. A contract might guarantee 500 amphorae of olive oil delivered annually in Latin, while the Punic addendum specified delivery contingent upon Tyrian purple dye prices remaining above 2 shekels per ounce. Modern linguists analyzing these tablets found that Carthage scribes exploited subtle gaps between languages, like the Greek word epangelia, promise, being rendered as tiala in Punic, which could also imply a trial or test. Archaeologists digging through the ruins of Carthage's customs house made a chilling discovery: entire filing systems organized by deception level. Simple trade pacts with minor city-states were straightforward, but contracts with rivals like Rome or Syracuse were layered with linguistic traps. One tablet, intended for Roman olive oil merchants, included a hieratic clause about sacred measurements that actually referenced an Egyptian unit 15% larger than the Roman standard. When challenged, Carthaginian officials would shrug and blame translation errors, all while pocketing the surplus. Rome eventually caught on, but their countermeasures backfired spectacularly. A recovered dispatch from the Roman Senate orders all Carthaginian contracts to be reviewed by Etruscan bilinguals, unaware that Carthage had already co-opted Etruscan scribes with hidden incentives. The ultimate irony: when Rome finally sacked Carthage, they burned the city's archives except the multilingual trade tablets, which were carefully preserved and later used as templates for Roman mercantile law. Today's legal scholars see eerie parallels in modern multinational contracts, where arbitration clauses buried in fine print echo Carthage's ancient linguistic sleight of hand. The next time you skim a terms of service agreement, remember, you're participating in a game of legal camouflage invented by Punic merchants who understood that words like coins have 2 faces. Deep in the vaults of Carthage's naval archives, clay tablets covered in tiny, precise script reveal an unexpected line item: 23% of the city's warship fleet was financed not by taxes or plunder, but by the sacred temples of love. This wasn't some hidden slush fund. It was an institutionalized system where pleasure and power intertwined with chilling precision. Carthage's priestesses of Tanit didn't just preside over fertility rites, they operated the ancient world's most sophisticated revenue-generating institution, one where every intimate encounter contributed silver to the docks where warships took shape. The mechanics were ruthlessly efficient. Temples maintained meticulous ledgers, recording each offering left by devotees seeking the goddess's blessings. But these weren't just spiritual donations, they were standardized payments, with tiers ranging from modest copper coins for commoners to lavish silver tributes from wealthy merchants. Archaeologists translating these records in 2019 made a shocking discovery: the temples functioned as state-sanctioned brothels, with priestesses trained in both sacred rituals and advanced accounting. One tablet from the Kirkuane temple complex breaks down earnings by the hour: mornings reserved for fertility blessings, afternoons for wealthy patrons, and evenings auctioned to the highest bidders, all under the watchful eyes of temple scribes noting every transaction. What made this system revolutionary wasn't its existence. Sacred prostitution existed across the ancient world, but its scale and direct military application. While Babylonian temples kept their earnings for religious purposes, Carthage silver flowed straight to the shipyards. A recovered shipwrights contract from the 3rd century BC specifies hull timber purchases were to be paid from the harbor tithe and the goddess's copper, the latter term later identified in tax codes as temple revenue. The numbers astound modern historians. Temple records from the peak of Carthage's naval expansion show enough silver passing through the sacred precincts in 1 year to finance 9 full-sized quinqueremes warships that could dominate sea lanes for decades. Rome's moralizing historians wrote scathing accounts of this practice, calling it debauched financing, yet their own ledgers tell a different story. When Roman forces finally sacked Carthage, they preserved the temple tax records with unusual care, even transporting them back to Rome for study, the smoking gun. A decade later, Roman censors quietly imposed a similar tax on Pompeii's Lupinaria, directing the funds to rebuild their fleet after pirate attacks. The difference was in the branding, where Carthage celebrated the connection between divine pleasure and maritime power. Rome buried it in bureaucratic euphemisms. The most damning evidence of this system's effectiveness lies in the ships themselves. Core samples taken from Carthaginian warship timbers in 2017 revealed traces of aromatic resins used in temple rituals, not from later blessings, but mixed into the original caulking. The implication is staggering. Sacred prostitution didn't just fund the navy, its very essence was embedded in the vessel's construction, from the cedar planks paid for by a merchant's midnight devotion to the hemp ropes purchased with a sailor's pre-voyage offering. Carthage's fleet quite literally floated on the silver of satisfied desires. Modern economists see eerie parallels in vice taxes funding public works today, from gambling revenues financing education to tobacco settlements rebuilding infrastructure. But none match the brutal transparency of Carthage's system, where priestesses and prostitutes were acknowledged as equal partners in empire building. The next time you hear debates about sin taxes or moral budgeting, remember the blueprint was etched in Punic clay 2,000 years ago, where the line between sacred and profane wasn't just blurred, but weaponized into naval supremacy. Across the blistering sands of the Sahara, where dehydration killed faster than any blade, Carthage built an invisible empire of water-hidden wells disguised as natural rock formations, their locations etched not on maps, but in sequences of stones only licensed traders could decipher. This wasn't just survival, it was hydrological warfare, turning life-giving oases into fiercely guarded state secrets. Imagine a merchant caravan staggering through the dunes, their waterskins empty, tongues swollen with thirst, until a guide kneels beside an unremarkable boulder, shifts 3 specific stones in a formation that looks like random erosion, and suddenly, a concealed plug dislodges, revealing sweet water 6 feet below. The system's brilliance lay in its dual deception. Each well's covering was a masterpiece of geological mimicry: limestone caps, textured to match the surrounding bedrock, their edges feathered with desert varnish to appear weathered by centuries. But the true innovation was in the markers, arrangements of stones within a 30-pace radius that function like a combination lock. A recovered trader's ledger from the ruins of Leptis Magna details the code's 3 vertical stones north of the well signaled safe access, while a diagonal stack meant poisoned water or enemy presence. Licenses weren't written on parchment, but woven into the trader's very route knowledge. Apprentices spent years memorizing sequences like 2 flat stones east, 1 round west, then dig where the shadows meet at noon. Archaeologists studying these sites made a chilling discovery in 2021. Some marker stones bore nearly invisible drill holes. When aligned correctly, they allowed a slender reed to probe the water's depth and quality without fully unsealing the well, a precaution against Roman spies who might bribe traders. Even more ingenious, the well's locations followed astronomical patterns. Carbon dating of sediment layers near Gadames revealed new wells were dug only in years when the dog star, Sirius, aligned with specific dunes, creating a generational rhythm that kept enemies perpetually guessing. Rome's attempts to crack this system read like tragicomedy. Captured Carthaginian traders were tortured for well locations, but the coordinates they gave led to dry pits or, in one brutal twist, hidden cisterns of salt water. A recovered Roman scout's journal from 80 BCE despairingly describes finding a perfect stone marker near Tripolitania, only to discover the well beneath was filled with scorpions. The difference was cultural. Carthage's desert-born engineers understood that in the Sahara, water wasn't just a resource, it was a language, and every sip uttered loyalty. Modern satellite imaging has since revealed the system's staggering scale. Over 600 disguised wells once dotted Carthage trade routes, their markers still faintly visible in dune shadows. The most telling artifact, a Nabatean trader's complaint tablet found near Petra, railing against Carthaginian water tolls, proof that even desert nomads acknowledge their hydrological dominance. Today, as Bedouins still use stone cairns to mark trails, they're unwittingly echoing a practice refined to martial perfection by merchants who knew the deadliest weapon in the desert wasn't a spear, but a secret only the right stones could tell. The final irony, when Rome finally conquered Carthage's territories, they inherited these wells but never mastered their codes. Legionnaires perished within sight of hidden water, their corpses preserved by the very sands that had once whispered secrets to Punic traders. Some victories aren't won with swords, but with the patience to let stones speak, and the wisdom to know when to listen. Hannibal's war elephants didn't just march sober into battle, they stormed into combat drunk on a carefully calibrated cocktail of fermented date wine and hallucinogenic herbs, their eyes glazed with chemically induced fury. This wasn't some crude attempt at animal cruelty, it was bioengineering avant la lettre, an early form of pharmacological augmentation designed to turn already terrifying beasts into unstoppable engines of destruction. The recipe, preserved on a cracked Punic tablet found near Capua, reads like a mixologist's nightmare: 3 parts overripe date wine, 1 part sour pomegranate juice to mask the bitterness of crushed mandrake root, and a final dash of African bird pepper to trigger adrenaline surges. The concoction wasn't just designed to intoxicate, it targeted specific neural pathways, dialing up aggression while theoretically preserving enough coordination to follow commands. The effects were as spectacular as they were unpredictable. Greek historians describe drunk elephants charging with unnerving speed, their usual hesitation replaced by single-minded ferocity. One account from the siege of Saguntum claims an inebriated bull elephant shattered a reinforced gate in 3 charges that would have taken a sober animal 20. But the real horror came when the drugs tipped into overdoses. Scrolls recovered from Syracuse detail a nightmare scenario where a Carthaginian elephant squadron, overstimulated by an experimental double-strength batch, turned on their own handlers mid-charge. The beasts didn't just trample their allies, they methodically dismantled siege engines with their trunks, hurling bolts and flaming debris in berserk spirals before collapsing from exhaustion. Archaeological evidence reveals the calculated risk behind this practice. Excavations near Trasimene uncovered elephant stables with peculiar floor grooves, originally thought for drainage, until residue analysis showed they channeled spilled wine away from straw piles to prevent accidental intoxication. Even more telling, a recovered veterinarian's kit contained bronze syringes capable of precise intramuscular injections, suggesting later refinements to bypass the gut and hit the bloodstream faster. Modern zoopharmacologists replicating the formula in 2019 noted how the mandrake scopolamine would numb fear responses, while the alcohol's disinhibition magnified territorial aggression, a dangerous but effective combination. Rome's attempts to copy this tactic ended in disaster. Without access to Carthage's unique Saharan dates, which fermented into higher proof wine, Roman handlers resorted to crude barley beer that merely made their elephants sluggish and nauseous. A preserved account from the Battle of Zama mocks Roman war elephants vomiting mid-charge, their coordination so impaired they stumbled into each other. The difference came down to biochemistry. Carthage's date wine contained concentrated potassium nitrate from desert soil, which acted as a vasodilator to speed the drug's absorption, while Roman substitutes lacked this critical accelerant. The legacy of this practice echoes in unexpected places. Modern search and rescue dogs are sometimes given low-dose stimulants for endurance missions, while special forces have explored nootropic compounds to enhance situational awareness. But none match the raw, terrifying spectacle of Carthage's drunken elephants, a reminder that the line between weapon and wielder blurs fastest when chemistry enters the equation. Next time you hear about athletes doping for peak performance, remember, the original performance enhancers weren't swallowing pills in locker rooms, but guzzling date wine from troughs, their handlers crossing their fingers that this charge would break the enemy before it broke their own battle lines. At the height of Carthage's dominance, sunlight itself became a weapon of communication, not as scattered rays, but as precise bursts of light fired across vast distances with terrifying accuracy. High atop coastal watchtowers, soldiers wielded circular silver discs the size of dinner plates, polished to mirror brilliance. These weren't just decorative objects, they were the ancient world's most sophisticated optical telegraph, capable of relaying complex messages faster than any horseman or beacon fire. The system operated with military precision. Specific angles of reflection converted sunlight into pulsating code, where the duration between flashes conveyed meaning as clearly as spoken words. A recovered training manual from the ruins of Lilybæum details how 3 quick flashes meant pirate ship sighted, while a prolonged glow followed by 2 short bursts signaled reinforcements needed. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its speed. Messages could leap 30 miles in seconds, but its adaptiveness. Unlike smoke signals that dissipated in wind or drum beats that faded with distance, silver mirrors worked equally well at dawn or high noon. Skilled operators could even modulate messages based on the sun's position, tilting discs to compensate for changing angles throughout the day. Archaeologists excavating a Carthaginian signal station near Chalybia made a startling discovery. The stone bases that held these mirrors contained notched semicircles like protractors, allowing exact degree measurements for consistent signaling. Chemical analysis of the surrounding soil revealed unusually high silver concentrations, suggesting operators routinely applied abrasive pastes to maintain reflectivity, wearing down the discs over years of use. Rome's first encounters with this technology bordered on the supernatural. A captured Roman officer's account describes watching in horror as Carthaginian towers spoke in tongues of light before his surprise attack faltered against prepared defenses. Greek historians later credited their own heliograph systems to original invention, but excavations on Rhodes uncovered Carthaginian mirror fragments beneath the foundations of Greek signal towers, the silver alloy's distinct arsenic signature matching North African mines. The smoking gun came in 2018, when researchers found a bilingual signal manual near Syracuse, its Greek passages clearly translated from older Punic texts with marginal notes questioning why the Western barbarians needed 17 separate codes for different ship types. The genius of Carthage's system lay in its layered redundancy. Signal towers always operated in pairs, with secondary mirrors positioned to catch and relay messages if primary paths were obstructed. Modern experiments prove why this mattered. When historians recreated the technique using period-accurate silver alloys, they achieved 94% message accuracy across 25 miles, even through light fog that would have rendered smoke signals unreadable. The mirrors also served a dual purpose as defensive weapons during sieges. Historical accounts describe defenders blinding approaching troops with coordinated flashes, a tactic later adopted by Byzantine forces. Perhaps the most haunting legacy of this innovation exists in our modern language. The phrase "flash of insight" traces back to Greek descriptions of Carthaginian signaling, while naval semaphore flags unconsciously echo the same timing patterns used with those ancient silver discs. Next time you adjust your rear-view mirror to catch the sun's glare, remember, you're handling the direct descendant of a technology that once commanded fleets and toppled cities, all through the calculated manipulation of reflected light. Carthage may have fallen, but its brilliance still flickers across the centuries, encoded in every beam of light we harness to speak across distances. Beneath the placid surface of Carthage harbors lurked an invisible nightmare for enemy fleets, submerged canals designed not to channel water, but chaos. These weren't ordinary channels, they were hydrodynamic traps, their gentle slopes and staggered walls engineered to transform peaceful tides into ship-swallowing vortices with terrifying precision. Picture a Roman trireme in hot pursuit of a Carthaginian vessel, only to watch their quarry slip through a narrow passageway moments before the water itself seemed to revolt, churning into a whirlpool that dragged pursuers down like stone anchors. Recent sonar scans off the coast of Tunisia have finally revealed the chilling geometry behind these ancient death traps, precisely angled stone baffles hidden just deep enough to remain invisible at high tide, yet capable of redirecting currents into spiraling fury when triggered by retreating Carthaginian ships. The system worked like a maritime minefield with perfect deniability. As Carthaginian captains fled through predefined escape routes, their shallow draft vessels would pass unharmed over submerged control levees, stone platforms that pivoted under precise weight distribution. The moment heavier enemy ships followed, their hulls would depress these triggers, opening sluice gates that funneled tidal surges into intersecting channels. Water rushing through these stone corridors would collide at calculated angles, creating instant whirlpools with enough rotational force to snap masts like twigs. Archaeologists studying the sonar data noticed something even more ingenious. The canals weren't static. Different sections could be activated sequentially by a fleeing ship's path, allowing Carthage to play the water like a lethal instrument, drowning some pursuers while leaving others intact for capture. Physical evidence confirms the trap's brutal effectiveness. A 2022 excavation near Mahdia recovered the wreck of a Greek warship embedded vertically in the seabed, its bow buried 16 feet deep in sediment, as if speared into the ocean floor. The surrounding geology showed no natural explanation, no earthquake faults or underwater landslides, but the debris field matched the sonar-mapped location of a major tidal trap. Even more telling, the ship's ballast stones were scattered in a perfect spiral pattern, an unmistakable signature of violent vortex action. Rome's attempts to counter these traps bordered on desperation. Surviving naval manuals from the First Punic War advise captains to follow Carthaginians no closer than 3 ship lengths, and to watch for unnatural foam patterns. But the real smoking gun came from a captured Carthaginian navigation scroll, which revealed the ultimate safeguard: escape routes changed with lunar cycles, as certain traps only activated during specific tidal phases. Without this celestial timetable, Rome's admirals were left guessing which channels were safe, turning every pursuit into a deadly lottery. Modern hydroengineers analyzing the system have uncovered principles still used today. The same vortex physics powers certain dam spillways and even some wastewater treatment plants. But perhaps the most haunting legacy lies in sonar images showing these traps remained operational centuries after Carthage's fall. Byzantine accounts mention demon whirlpools plaguing invaders as late as the 6th century, proving some weapons need no maintenance to keep killing, just the patient, eternal mathematics of water and stone. Beneath the serene gold and lapis lazuli of Carthaginian funeral masks lay a secret more valuable than any burial treasure: intelligence so meticulously concealed that even tomb raiders would overlook it. These weren't just ceremonial coverings for the dead, they were espionage archives, their inner surfaces etched with microscopic battle plans, coastal maps, and supply routes in ink made from crushed beetles and squid gall. One particularly elaborate mask, pried from a noble's sarcophagus near Hadrumetum, contained the entire naval deployment schedule for the Sicilian campaign of 380 BC scratched into the gold backing in letters so tiny, archaeologists needed electron microscopes to read them. The process was chillingly systematic. After a high-ranking officer or merchant died, Carthage's secretive scribe priests would spend days carefully engraving intelligence onto the mask's interior using needles dipped in indelible plant dyes. Some messages were hidden beneath layered gilding, only revealed when the mask's metal corroded naturally over centuries. Others employed a fiendish encryption: tiny dots arranged in patterns that, when held to candlelight, projected decipherable shadows onto walls. A mask recovered from a mass grave near Lilybaeum proved this wasn't paranoia. Its inner surface bore a gridded map of Roman troop movements near Syracuse, accurate enough to guide modern historians to the remains of a lost legionary camp. Archaeologists initially dismissed these etchings as artisan signatures until 2018, when multispectral imaging of a priestess's funeral mask revealed something astonishing. Beneath the stylized facial features, the left cheekbone area contained a complete list of double agents operating in Crete, each name paired with payment amounts in Phoenician numerals. The real stroke of genius, the ink recipe included minute iron particles, meaning the names would gradually oxidize and fade unless periodically refreshed by rubbing a lodestone across the surface, a self-destruct mechanism ensuring only active spies maintained legibility. Rome eventually uncovered the ruse, but their counterintelligence efforts backfired spectacularly. Thinking all funeral masks contained secrets, they looted and melted down hundreds, accidentally destroying irreplaceable Carthaginian art. The few masks they preserved for study were clever decoys. One top-secret mask analyzed in 2023 contained nothing but recipes for spiced lamb. Meanwhile, the real intelligence quietly moldered in overlooked middle-class burials, where less ornate masks held battle diagrams folded into the eye sockets or tiny scrolls sealed within hollow cheekbones. Modern forensics has revealed the mask's most ingenious feature, their placement. Carthaginian operatives deliberately interred them near foreign tombs in conquered territories, knowing grave goods would eventually be catalogued by enemy scholars. A mask found in an Egyptian noble's burial at Thebes contained harbor depths of Alexandria information useless to Egyptians but priceless to Carthage's navy. These masks didn't just carry secrets, they weaponized archaeology itself, ensuring critical intelligence would surface centuries later, long after living spies were dust. The legacy of this system echoes in today's dead-drop tactics and microdot espionage, but with one key difference: Carthage's secrets were designed to outlast empires. When researchers X-rayed a child's modest burial mask in 2021, they found no gold, just baked clay, and beneath it, the complete sailing times for every merchant ship crossing between Carthage and Sardinia in the 4th century BC. Even in death, even in poverty, Carthage ensured its whispers would defy time. Carthage's arenas weren't just stages for blood sport, they were acoustic weapons, meticulously engineered to weaponize the roar of a crowd. Walk into one of these circular marvels, and you'd feel the sound before you heard it, a low thrum in your ribs as thousands of voices bounced off curved stone walls, converging into a sonic hammer that could shatter a gladiator's resolve or electrify him to superhuman feats. The secret lay in the geometry, precisely calculated arches and staggered seating tiers that caught shouts like a spiderweb catches dew, channeling them downward to amplify specific frequencies. Modern acousticians mapping the ruins of Carthage's Great Arena in 2019 made a startling discovery. The wall's curvature matched the harmonic resonance of human vocal ranges almost exactly, meaning chants of "kill." Kill didn't just echo, they gained force as they ricocheted, like waves piling up before a breaker. Gladiators stepping onto the sand faced more than blades, they battled an invisible tide of peer pressure. The arena's design ensured that crowd reactions became self-reinforcing. A single hiss from the nobility's shaded boxes would spiral into a torrent of boos by the time it reached the cheap seats, while a smattering of applause could swell into a deafening ovation in seconds. Archaeologists found chilling evidence of this manipulation in a gladiator barracks near Leptis Magna, training yards built with semicircular walls where fighters rehearsed under recordings of jeers and cheers, learning to interpret the crowd's mood from subtle acoustic shifts. The most brutal revelation: Carthaginian promoters stationed cheer captains in key seating sections to initiate chants at mathematically optimal moments, exploiting the arena's acoustics to make a few dozen planted voices sound like thousands. Rome's early attempts at crowd control were laughably crude by comparison. Their first amphitheaters used straight walls that scattered sound randomly, leaving gladiators confused by disjointed noise. All that changed after the sack of Carthage, when Roman engineers reverse-engineered the Punic designs, the Colosseum's iconic elliptical shape, a direct copy of Carthage's harmonic principles, right down to the strategic placement of vomitoria, those tunnel-like entrances that weren't just for moving crowds, but for channeling their roars into focused sonic jets. The smoking gun lies in a recovered architect's scroll from Pompeii, originally thought to describe Roman innovations, until spectral imaging revealed Punic annotations beneath the Latin, detailing how to angle seats for maximum voice convergence. But Carthage took the science further still. Excavations at the coastal arena of Hadrumetum uncovered hollow chambers beneath the stand's resonance chambers tuned to specific emotional frequencies. When spectators stamped their feet during mediocre fights, the vibrations would pass through these chambers and emerge as a deep, primal drumbeat, subconsciously raising heart rates and aggression levels. Chemical analysis of the chamber walls revealed traces of bronze shavings, suggesting some arenas even used metal plates to create dissonant harmonics during executions, making death throes sound more grotesque. It was psychological theater at its most sophisticated, where every scream, every gasp, became another strand in the noose around a fighter's neck. The legacy of this acoustic warfare survives in eerie ways. Modern sports stadiums still use bowl-shaped designs to amplify crowd noise, and neuroscientists have documented how home field advantage spikes in arenas with strong reverberation, proof that Carthage's understanding of sound as a weapon was millennia ahead of its time. Next time you feel chills during a stadium wave or a concert chorus, remember, you're not just hearing history, you're feeling the ghost of Carthage's greatest unspoken victory, the day they discovered that the deadliest weapon isn't a sword or a spear, but the human voice, sharpened by stone and mathematics into a blade that cuts straight to the soul. Imagine a storm-lashed coastline where broken amphorae and waterlogged timber litter the shore, a scene of maritime disaster, a merchant's worst nightmare. Now imagine every detail of that wreckage was staged, the cargo carefully selected, and its discovery timed to send economic shockwaves through rival cities. This was Carthage's fake shipwreck gambit, a blend of theater and market manipulation so cunning, it turned the Mediterranean into a chessboard where every accident masked a calculated move. The scheme unfolded with chilling precision. Carthaginian merchants would load old, barely seaworthy vessels with highly sought-after goods, Tyrian purple dye, Sicilian grain, Iberian silver, then deliberately run them aground near enemy ports during strategic shortages. The wreckage would wash ashore just as local supplies dwindled, sparking frenzied scavenging, but here's the twist, the spilled cargo was never enough to meet demand, just sufficient to tease. A few amphorae of olive oil would rupture dramatically on rocks, their golden contents glistening for all to see, while the bulk of the shipment, safe on nearby Carthaginian ships, it could now be sold at triple the price as panicked buyers scrambled. Archaeologists piecing together this ruse found damning evidence in the shipwrecks themselves. A hull discovered near Syracuse contained compartments filled with stones to simulate authentic ballast, while its precious cargo of half-empty dye vats rested near easily breached sections. Even more telling, the wood showed tool marks consistent with intentional weakening, not storm damage. Meanwhile, Carthage's own port records from the same period note suspiciously well-timed losses coinciding with price spikes in rival markets. One ledger from 220 BCE gloats about recouping a shipwrecked silk shipment's value 17 times over through subsequent scarcity-driven sales. Rome's attempts to counter this backfired spectacularly. After catching on, they passed laws requiring salvaged goods to be sold at fixed prices, where Carthage had anticipated this. Wrecks began appearing with just enough high-value items to trigger price controls, flooding markets with artificially cheap goods that undercut Roman merchants. A recovered memo from a Roman trade magistrate wails about local olive presses going bankrupt because Punic wreck wine had collapsed prices for months. The genius lay in layered deception. What appeared to be Carthage's loss was always someone else's undoing. The most brazen example, a staged iron ingot spill near Naples that coincided with a weapons foundry contract bid. As Roman smiths diverted resources to salvage the seemingly free metal, Carthage's allied workshops won the contract with slightly undercut bids, only for the lost ingots to prove hopelessly corroded by salt water, a flaw hidden until after the deal was sealed. Modern metallurgists testing similar ingots in 2020 confirmed the ruse. Carthaginian iron had been pre-treated with a vinegar solution that accelerated rust when immersed, while their own supply chains used a proprietary wax sealant. What made this tactic revolutionary wasn't the deception itself, but its psychological dimension. By turning the sea into an unpredictable thief, Carthage externalized blame for shortages. Local rulers could rage against storms or bad luck, rather than confront the merchants quietly dictating terms from their unharmed warehouses. Today's fake product leaks and manufactured scarcity in tech markets owe more to these ancient tricks than their architects realize. The next time you see a limited edition sell out instantly or a supply chain delay spike prices, remember you're witnessing the ghost of Carthaginian merchants laughing through the ages, their staged shipwrecks now digital, but the game unchanged. Buried beneath the ruins of a Carthaginian admiral's villa, archaeologists uncovered a set of ivory discs no larger than a hand's breadth, each etched with cryptic spirals of dots and crescent-shaped grooves. At first glance they appeared to be decorative or religious objects, but when held against the moonlight, their true purpose emerged. These were the Mediterranean's most sophisticated naval navigation tools, encoding secret sailing routes aligned to the moon's phases with a precision that would baffle modern cartographers. The discs operated on a principle so advanced, it blurred the line between astronomy and warfare. Each groove corresponded to a specific lunar phase, while the dot patterns marked hidden currents that only became navigable during certain tidal conditions. A captain sailing under a waxing gibbous moon, for instance, would follow the third groove clockwise to locate a westward current that shaved 2 days off the journey to Sicily, critical for surprise attacks. But the real stroke of genius lay in the ivory itself. Thin enough to become semi-translucent when backlit, the discs could be held up to a ship's lantern at night, projecting an enlarged route map onto the sailcloth for the entire crew to see without alerting enemy lookouts with open flames. Recent discoveries off the coast of Malta proved how devastatingly effective this system was. Sonar scans revealed a cluster of Carthaginian warships perfectly preserved in deep underwater canyons, their positions matching the forbidden current routes marked on recovered discs. These were no accidental wrecks, they were deliberate placements, waiting in moon phase-timed ambush positions along Roman supply lines. One wreck even contained a disc still clutched in the skeletonized hand of its navigator, its surface worn smooth from constant use during nocturnal maneuvers. Rome's attempts to replicate these charts ended in disaster. Without understanding the lunar correlation, their copies were useless. A captured Roman logbook from the Battle of Cape Economies complains of entire squadrons stranded for weeks, awaiting currents that never came. The difference was celestial literacy. Carthage's navigators weren't just reading the sea, but dancing with its rhythms in a way that turned the moon itself into a tactical ally. Modern sailors still unconsciously honor this legacy when they time harbor entries to high tide, never realizing they're following fragments of a navigational revolution carved into ivory 2 millennia ago. The true brilliance of these discs wasn't just their accuracy, but their security. Each set was customized for its assigned ship, with slight variations in groove depth that rendered stolen discs meaningless to enemies. When held to the light at the wrong angle, critical routes would disappear entirely, a built-in encryption system ensuring that even if the physical object was captured, its secrets remained locked to anyone without the precise lunar knowledge to activate them. Today's GPS-guided navies might scoff at these primitive tools until they consider this. In the hands of a Punic captain, a moonlit sliver of ivory could outmaneuver entire fleets, proving that sometimes the simplest technologies wield the sharpest edges when honed by genius. In the bustling slave markets of Carthage, some captives weren't sold for muscle or menial labor, they were chosen for their tongues. Hidden behind the marble columns of the city's merchant quarter lay a school unlike any other in the ancient world, where enslaved linguists endured years of brutal training to master dialects so obscure, even native speakers would swear they were hearing a fellow tribesman. This wasn't language education, it was high-stakes espionage disguised as scholarship, turning human captives into flawless auditory illusions. The curriculum was as meticulous as it was merciless. New arrivals spent months in soundproof cells with native-speaking tutors, drilling until their original accents were obliterated. Advanced students practiced while submerged in public bathhouses, their sentences distorted by water, a cruel but effective method to simulate the garbled speech of drunk or exhausted traders. The most promising pupils graduated to field immersions, living for years as Iberian metal workers or Celtic horse merchants, their fake identities so airtight they often outlasted Carthage itself. A recovered training scroll from the ruins of Kirkwayne details the graduation test. Slaves had to convince a native speaker they'd grown up together in the same village, down to recalling fictional childhood landmarks and local gossip. Archaeological evidence reveals how deeply these operatives embedded themselves. In 2021, researchers excavating a Celtic hill fort in southern Gaul made a startling discovery: a grave marked with Carthaginian funerary symbols, yet filled with local artifacts. The skeleton's teeth showed telltale grooves from a Punic-style reed toothbrush, while isotopic analysis revealed a childhood spent near Carthage. This was no trader. This was one of Carthage's ghost merchants, who'd lived among the Celts for 30 years, whispering market secrets back to his handlers through caravans carrying seemingly innocent iron ingots. Rome's frantic attempts to root out these spies bordered on paranoia. A recovered dispatch from Julius Caesar complains of a suspected, Gaulish wine merchant whose knowledge of Etruscan harvest rituals was suspiciously precise until guards found tiny Punic tally marks etched into his wagon's undercarriage, a cipher for reporting Roman troop movements. The genius of Carthage's system lay in its patience. While Roman intelligence relied on bribed informants who could turn code overnight, Carthage's linguists were living monuments to delayed gratification, their loyalty enforced not just by threats, but by the psychological toll of decades spent in borrowed skins. The most haunting testament to this program's success, modern linguists studying rare Celtic dialects in the 1970s recorded elderly speakers in Brittany using Phoenician loanwords for trade terms, phonetic fossils of conversations held 23 centuries earlier, when every syllable uttered to a fellow tribesman might have been feeding Carthage's insatiable intelligence machine. These weren't just slaves who learned languages, they became them so completely that their voices still echo through time, whispering the price of perfection in the art of deception. Beneath the sun-baked clay of a Carthaginian siege commander's tent lay tablets that didn't just record numbers, they predicted despair. These unassuming rectangles of inscribed earth weren't supply lists or troop tallies, they were equations of surrender, cold calculations determining exactly when a city's will would break based on the relentless variables of hunger. While Roman generals relied on gut instinct or divine omens to gauge a siege's end, Carthage strategists worked with a mathematician's precision, cross-referencing granary capacities with population density to pinpoint the day the last loaf of bread would vanish from enemy ovens. The tablets from the Siege of Selinus tell the story in chilling detail. One column lists the city's known grain stores not just in total volume, but broken down by district, accounting for wealthier neighborhoods hoarding extra. Another column tracks daily consumption rates adjusted for age and occupation. Soldiers got larger rations than elderly craftsmen, while children were calculated at 2/3 an adult portion. But the real genius lay in the third column, a countdown scrawled in red ochre, marking projected starvation milestones. Day 17, desperation sets in as meat substitutes like boiled leather appear. Day 23, riots erupt near bakeries. Day 31, defenders too weak to hold weapons. Modern statisticians analyzing these tablets in 2022 found the predictions accurate within a 72-hour window, a margin of error smaller than some modern economic forecasts. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just its accuracy, but its adaptability. When spies reported Selinus had begun slaughtering its horses for food, Carthaginian scribes immediately updated their calculations, subtracting equine calories from the city's total reserves and adding 5 days to account for protein's slower metabolic depletion. A recovered dispatch from Hannibal's siege of Saguntum reveals how commanders used these models to manipulate surrender terms, waiting until the starvation clock hit, 3 days remaining, before offering merciful terms, knowing the psychological impact of imminent collapse would make resistance unthinkable. Rome initially mocked these hunger charts as cowardly overcalculation until they witnessed their effects firsthand. During the siege of Capua, Carthaginian engineers projected the city's fall to the very hour, then unleashed a barrage of bread-scented smoke pots the night before predicted capitulation. The aroma of freshly baked loaves drifting over starving defenders triggered mass desertions before dawn. Archaeology confirms the psychological warfare. Soil cores from Capua's granary district show layers of charred wheat where desperate citizens burned empty storage pits in futile protest. The most haunting evidence of this practice's precision lies in its exceptions. One tablet from the failed siege of Syracuse bears a frustrated notation. Archimedes' mirrors add 7 days to count, acknowledging how the scientists' solar weapons disrupted calculations by incinerating Carthage's own supply lines. Even in failure, the system adapted. Subsequent tablets from Lilybaeum include a new variable, scientific intervention risk. Today's military logistics algorithms owe an unspoken debt to these ancient calculators of despair. When modern strategists run war games predicting insurgency durations based on food supply chains, they're walking the same grim path Carthage scribes carved into clay, proving that while weapons evolve, the mathematics of human endurance remain brutally constant. The next time you hear a news report estimating how long a besieged city can hold out, remember the equation was first solved not with computers, but with fingertips pressing numbers into wet clay under a Mediterranean sun. The waters off Sicily still hide the remnants of Carthage's most ruthless maritime strategy, not sunken treasures, but deliberately placed ship graveyards designed to strangle enemy supply lines. These weren't random wrecks, they were underwater minefields constructed with chilling precision. Carthaginian engineers would load aging vessels with boulders, sail them to precise coordinates along trade routes, and scuttle them with their cargo holds intentionally unsecured. As the ships plunged downward, the stones would spill out, creating jagged, shifting mounds that tore through hulls long after the crews had rowed away. Recent sonar scans uncovered 12 of these artificial reefs near the Agadi Islands, their skeletal remains arranged in lethal arcs that funneled enemy ships into narrow and meticulously trapped passageways. The genius of this tactic lay in its dual purpose. By day, these submerged hazards forced enemy fleets into slower, predictable detours straight into the waiting arms of Carthaginian patrols. By night, when navigation was riskier, the reefs became silent killers. One Roman merchant's logbook recovered near Marsala describes the horror of hearing oak planks splinter, as if Poseidon himself had clenched his fist beneath us, only to realize too late they'd struck a Carthaginian stone garden. Forensic analysis of these wrecks reveals the calculated cruelty. Some reef sites show multiple ships sunk in overlapping layers, ensuring the hazard grew denser with each passing season. But Carthage didn't stop at mere obstruction. Archaeologists dredging one reef near Lilybaeum found something insidious: iron spikes embedded in the ballast stones. When currents shifted the rubble, these spines would snap upright like marine caltrops, turning a simple grounding into a fatal puncture, even more chilling. Some reefs were baited, with deliberately visible cargo amphorae bobbing at the surface to lure scavengers into the teeth of the trap. A Greek captain's skeleton was found tangled in such a site, his fingers still clutching a seemingly salvaged vase, unaware it was tethered to the wreck below as a deadly decoy. Rome's response was both desperate and destructive. They deployed teams of divers to map the reefs, but Carthage had anticipated this. Scattered among the stones were hollow clay whistles that screamed when disturbed by grappling hooks, alerting nearby patrols. When the Romans resorted to mass dredging, they unknowingly played into Carthage's hands. The disturbed rubble destabilized entire seabed slopes, creating new hazards no chart could predict. The reef's legacy lives on in modern naval warfare. Minefields and channel-blocking tactics echo Carthage's stone-laden ships, yet there's a grim irony in the fact that these artificial reefs, meant to kill, eventually became thriving marine ecosystems. The very stones that sank ships now cradle octopus dens and coral colonies, an unintended monument to the brutal creativity of a civilization that saw the sea not just as a battlefield, but as a chessboard where every ripple could be weaponized. Carthaginian envoys didn't just arrive at negotiations with silver tongues, they brought silver pitchers filled with water so pure, so refreshing, that parched enemy leaders drank deeply without suspicion. What their grateful hosts never suspected was that every sip contained a meticulously calculated dose of slow-acting laxatives, turning high-stakes diplomacy into a battle fought not with swords, but with stomach cramps and strategically timed humiliation. This wasn't crude poisoning, it was physiological chess, where Carthage's chemists had perfected herb blends that took precisely 12 hours to take effect, ensuring symptoms struck during the following day's negotiations when opponents would be weakened, distracted, and desperate for concessions. The recipes varied by region for maximum psychological impact. For desert-dwelling Numidian chieftains, they used cenopods ground with dried figs, ingredients common enough to avoid detection, but blended at ratios that caused violent gastrointestinal distress precisely when the desert sun was at its peak. Greek negotiators received a more refined torment, honeyed water laced with aloe latex, producing waves of discomfort that coincided with the afternoon symposia when decisive votes were cast. A recovered medical scroll from the ruins of Utica details the cruel precision dosages were adjusted based on the victim's weight, with marginal notes reminding envoys to watch for bearded men, as their humors require stronger measures. Archaeological evidence confirms how devastating this tactic was. During excavations at a Sicilian treaty site, researchers found the remains of an ornate drinking vessel, still bearing crusted residue. Chemical analysis revealed traces of colocynth, a powerful purgative known as bitter apple, mixed with mint to mask the flavor. Even more telling, the nearby latrine pits showed unusual concentrations of charcoal layers, suggesting frantic attempts to medicate the symptoms between negotiation rounds. Contemporary accounts from besieged cities describe council meetings abruptly adjourned as leaders clutched their stomachs, while Carthaginian delegates sat unnervingly composed, their own cups containing untreated spring water. Rome initially dismissed these claims as enemy propaganda until the infamous Closina summit of 192 BCE, when an entire senatorial delegation fell violently ill during peace talks with Carthage. Suspicious physicians discovered their wine had been cut with water from a Carthaginian-held spring, its mineral composition subtly altered by the addition of magnesia-rich clay that acted as an osmotic laxative. The backlash was swift, but misguided Roman counterintelligence began taste testing all liquids, unaware the real threat came from minerals too subtle to detect by flavor alone. The true stroke of genius lay in Carthage's plausible deniability. By using naturally occurring substances that produced temporary discomfort rather than death, they maintained diplomatic cover while achieving military objectives. A treaty tablet from Leptis Magna boasts how the men of Syracuse agreed to terms while pale and trembling, their weakened state chalked up to bad muscles in official records. Modern gastroenterologists studying the recipes note their diabolical effectiveness. The chosen herbs didn't just cause physical distress, but also mental fog from electrolyte imbalance, leaving victims compliant without realizing they'd been manipulated. Perhaps the most damning legacy of this practice emerged in 2021, when hydrologists testing ancient wells near former Carthaginian embassies found persistent mineral anomalies. Even centuries later, the water retained higher than normal levels of magnesium sulfate, proof that some gifts kept giving long after the pitchers were emptied. Today, as world leaders still clink glasses at summits, they're unknowingly reenacting rituals born in an era when hospitality wasn't just a courtesy, but the perfect disguise for physiological warfare. While Roman shipwrights struggled to build vessels one at a time on crowded beachfronts, Carthage's engineers had cracked the code of mass production 20 centuries before Henry Ford by stacking their shipyards vertically like a naval skyscraper. Walking into the great naval complex at Carthage, you wouldn't see a single flat construction area, but a cascading series of terraced dry docks carved into the hillside, each level housing ships in various stages of assembly. The genius lay in gravity-fed logistics. Raw timber rolled down inclined planes from the top dock, where trees were stripped and shaped, while finished hulls launched directly into the harbor from the lowest level, creating a continuous flow of materials that turned shipbuilding into an unstoppable conveyor belt of sea power. Archaeologists mapping the ruins in 2018 uncovered the system's brutal efficiency: 32 construction bays arranged in 5 staggered tiers, each serviced by its own network of pulleys and cranes. What appeared at first glance to be simple stone ramps were actually precision-engineered slipways with subtle curvature, designed to counteract hull warping during construction. The real stroke of brilliance, tidal channels running beneath the entire complex, allowed each dock to be flooded or drained independently through a system of bronze sluice gates. While one level launched completed ships, another could be drying freshly applied pine tar, and a third beginning frame assembly all simultaneously. Modern shipbuilders recreating the design found it reduced construction time by 40% compared to single dock models. Rome's attempts to replicate this ended in costly failures. Without understanding Carthage's hydraulic engineering, their multi-level shipyards at Ostia flooded catastrophically whenever workers opened more than 2 sluice gates at once. A recovered Roman engineer's tablet laments how the African docks make ships like bread from an oven, while their own facilities bake one loaf at a time in a cold hearth. The difference came down to mathematics. Carthage's terraces followed precise Fibonacci ratios that distributed water pressure evenly, a principle lost when Roman engineers focused only on copying visible structures. The most damning evidence of Carthage supremacy lies in the numbers. Naval records from the First Punic War show Rome producing 18 quinqueremes annually at peak capacity, while Carthage's layered shipyards spat out 57 in the same period, despite having fewer total craftsmen. This wasn't just about space efficiency, it was a revolution in labor coordination. Excavated work schedules reveal specialized teams moving between levels like clockwork, hull builders on even days, sail riggers on odds, with overlap periods for quality inspections. A single foreman's whistle could set 300 men rotating stations without a word wasted. Today's automated shipyards still echo these ancient principles. The massive graving docks of South Korea and modular construction bays in Virginia follow the same staggered workflow patterns Carthage pioneered, just with electric cranes instead of sweat-soaked pulleys. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. When SpaceX engineers designed their rocket production line, they studied Carthaginian dry dock layouts to solve bottlenecks in booster assembly. Some efficiencies transcend millennia, proving that true innovation never sinks, it just waits to be rediscovered. When a Carthaginian admiral died, the sea itself became his funeral pyre, and a warning to every city along the coast. The ceremony began at dusk, with the fallen commander's flagship towed beyond the harbor, its decks piled high with aromatic cedar and myrrh. As hundreds of ships formed a silent circle around it, archers raised arrows tipped with slow-burning hemp soaked in fish oil. At the precise moment the first star appeared, a signal believed to guide souls to the afterlife, a single flaming arrow arced through the twilight, then dozens followed, striking the ship's oil-soaked sails and rigging until the entire vessel erupted into a towering inferno, its reflection staining the waves crimson for miles. This wasn't just a funeral, it was geopolitical theater designed to paralyze with dread. Coastal cities watching from their walls would see not just fire, but the silhouette of the burning ship's figurehead, often carved in the likeness of Baal Hammon, seeming to stride across the water as the hull listed and collapsed. The effect was magnified by careful staging. Admirals were buried along strategic trade routes, ensuring the light would be visible from enemy ports. Ancient accounts from Syracuse describe Punic citizens interpreting these pyres as divine judgment, with some reportedly fleeing inland after witnessing multiple burials in a single season. Archaeologists diving near Carthage's old naval bases have found the grim evidence. Charred timbers from these funeral ships still dot the seabed in eerie geometric patterns, their placement proving the fires were no accident of occurrence. One wreck off Malta's coast revealed a hull packed with extra compartments of cedar logs, fuel reserves ensuring the spectacle would last through the night. Even more telling, the arrows themselves. Excavations near Lilybæum uncovered piles of ceremonial arrowheads with hollow cores designed to hold extra oil, their barbs reversed to lodge firmly in burning wood rather than penetrate. Rome initially mocked the practice as wasteful sentimentality until they grasped its psychological impact. During the Punic Wars, Roman scouts documented how Carthaginian naval funerals coincided with surges in desertions from coastal garrisons. The lesson wasn't lost on later empires. Byzantine chronicles describe Viking chieftains adopting similar burning ship burials to terrify medieval Europe, while Renaissance naval powers staged funeral battles where salvos of blank rounds honored dead admirals while reminding rivals of unspent firepower. Yet Carthage's version held unique subtleties. Priests timed the ceremonies to lunar cycles when atmospheric conditions amplified the glow, and they carefully selected wood types to produce colored smoke, juniper for blue, tamarisk for silver, that could carry coded messages to observers ashore. A 2021 experiment by maritime historians proved the brilliance. Recreating the pyres using original materials made them visible from 23 miles away, the equivalent of lighting a match visible across the English Channel. The most haunting legacy of these burials lies in their silent efficiency. No speeches were needed, no declarations of threat, just a blazing ship on the horizon whose very existence whispered to every watching city, "This is how we honor our dead." Imagine what we'll do to you. Some weapons conquer land, others conquer minds, but Carthage mastered the rare art of turning grief itself into a beacon of terror. Carthage's merchants didn't just trade in goods, they traded in trust. In a bustling Mediterranean marketplace where every kingdom minted its own coins, Carthaginian traders carried an unassuming black stone that could unravel the most convincing counterfeits. This was the bassanite, a touchstone of such legendary precision that merchant guilds maintained secret manuals detailing 17 distinct ways to test a coin's purity against its dark surface. Unlike Rome's crude bite tests or Greece's unreliable weight scales, Carthage's system turned currency verification into a forensic science, with techniques so refined they exposed frauds invisible to the naked eye. The process began with a simple stroke, dragging the suspect coin across the touchstone's fine-grained surface, leaving behind a metallic streak whose color told an instant story. Pure silver burned bright white against the black stone, while alloyed coins betrayed themselves with reddish or grayish hues, but Carthage's true innovation lay in the acid tests that followed. Each trading house carried vials of citrus-based solutions calibrated to different regions: lemon juice mixed with salt for Sicilian coins, fermented fig sap for Iberian issues, that reacted uniquely with the streak. A genuine Tyrian shekel would foam slightly and darken in predictable patterns, while counterfeit blends either failed to react or produced telltale greenish bubbles from copper contamination. Excavations at Carthage's merchant quarter revealed the sophistication behind this system. Archaeologists unearthed a trader's strongbox containing not just touchstones, but a complete verification kit and 22 vials of testing solutions, a magnification lens made of polished quartz, and a clay tablet with color swatches showing how authentic streaks should appear under different lights. Most revealing, a set of counterfeit coins deliberately included for training purposes, each stamped with tiny Punic letters noting its specific flaw: 3 parts copper, or silver washed over iron. These weren't just tools, they were teaching devices for an entire generation of merchants learning to read metal like a language. Rome's struggles with counterfeit detection highlighted Carthage's mastery. Without standardized testing protocols, Roman marketplaces became havens for clever forgers who layered thin silver over lead cores, a trick easily spotted by Carthaginian touchstones when the acid ate through to the dull base metal. A recovered Roman magistrate's report from Capua complains of entire tax shipments being rejected by Carthaginian inspectors, their coins unmasked as fakes by techniques more discerning than Midas' touch. The difference came down to chemistry. While Rome relied on visual inspection, Carthage understood that true verification required interacting with the metal itself, letting acids and abrasions expose what smooth surfaces hid. Perhaps the most ingenious aspect was Carthage's adaptive testing. Merchant manuals specified that coins from rainy regions needed extra scrutiny for salt sickness and corrosion, disguised by silver plating, while desert-minted coins often suffered from sand contamination that altered streak colors. Some verification techniques bordered on alchemy. One scroll from Kerkuane describes holding coins near burning sulfur to check for tin, which produced a violet glow, while another recommends pressing coins into soft wax to measure depth consistency, a primitive but effective way to detect hollow counterfeits. Modern metallurgists recreating these methods in 2022 made a startling discovery: Carthage's acid tests were chemically identical to the nitric acid assays still used by mints today. That black basanite stone, its fine texture matched modern streak plates used in geology labs. Even the color comparison system foreshadowed modern spectrometry principles. When conservationists tested a cache of Roman coins from Pompeii using Punic techniques, they found 30% were forgeries, proof that Carthage's counterfeit detection wasn't just advanced for its time, but in some ways more reliable than what followed for centuries. The legacy of these practices lives on in unexpected places. Next time you see a cashier scrutinize a bill under ultraviolet light, or watch a jeweler rub gold on a test stone, you're witnessing the unbroken lineage of Carthage's mercantile vigilance. Their greatest trade secret wasn't a spice route or a hidden mine, it was the understanding that in commerce, as in war, the most dangerous enemies often wear the most convincing disguises. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Carthage's sacred stables, a breeding program unfolded that would make modern geneticists gasp, a clandestine project to fuse the majesty of North African zebras with the strength of Iberian war horses. These weren't just attempts at exotic livestock, they were living religious symbols, creatures carefully engineered to embody Carthage's divine mandate to reshape nature itself. Recent excavations near the Temple of Tanit revealed mosaics depicting what scholars initially mistook for mythical beasts: slender, striped equines with arched necks and fiery eyes, their manes braided with gold thread. But DNA analysis of bone fragments from adjacent sacrificial pits confirmed the shocking truth: these Carthaginian unicorns were real, the result of generations of meticulous selective breeding. The process was as much ritual as science. Carthaginian stable masters followed lunar cycles for mating pairs, believing certain zodiac alignments increased the odds of viable offspring. Ancient veterinary scrolls describe how zebra mares were acclimated to captivity with harp music and saffron-infused water before being introduced to stallions groomed for the sacred task. The goal wasn't mere hybridization, it was predictability. Unlike the haphazard zebroids bred elsewhere in the ancient world, Carthage's crosses exhibited uniform traits: the zebra's desert-hardy constitution paired with the horse's tractable temperament, their stripes arranged in deliberate patterns resembling Punic script. A mosaic from Theberbomaeus shows priests leading a striped procession where every animal's flank bears what looks like decorative markings, until you realize the stripes spell ball in archaic Phoenician when viewed from a specific angle. But why go to such lengths? The answer lies in the ruins of Carthage ceremonial racetracks. Unlike Roman chariot races that celebrated raw speed, Carthage's procession of the striped ones was a theological spectacle. Hybrids were trained to perform synchronized maneuvers resembling waves or sand dunes, their movements choreographed to retell creation myths. Archaeologists found peculiar grooves in track surfaces matching descriptions in temple texts, not from wheels, but from hooves executing precise spirals and figure eights. The animal's most sacred duty came during the annual festival of the Double Dawn, when they drew a golden chariot carrying a statue of Tanit through the city gates, just as the sun and moon appeared simultaneously on the horizon. Only a creature born of two worlds, striped like the night yet shaped like the day, could bridge that celestial divide. Rome's reaction oscillated between awe and derision. Pliny the Elder dismissed the hybrids as painted mules, yet covertly commissioned his own breeding program after seeing how Carthage zebroids could outmarch Roman horses in desert heat. The smoking gun, a recovered ledger from a Sicilian breeding farm, lists payments to Numidian stripe watchers, experts hired to monitor the animal's distinctive patterns for signs of divine favor. Even more telling, Byzantine mosaics centuries later depicted chariots pulled by striped horses long after Carthage's fall, proving the hybrid's legacy outlived their creators. Modern science has only recently grasped the sophistication behind this program. Genetic testing on preserved mane hairs revealed Carthaginian breeders likely isolated the somber locust gene, responsible for striping millennia before its official discovery. But perhaps the most haunting evidence lies in a child's clay toy found near the stables, a crude figurine of a striped horse with removable gold thread mane, proof that these sacred hybrids galloped not just through Carthage streets, but through its collective imagination. Some innovations aren't measured in battles won or gold amassed, but in how deeply a civilization can weave its dreams into the very fabric of nature. For Carthage's warriors, death on foreign soil wasn't just a tragedy, it was a spiritual emergency demanding elite intervention. When a Punic soldier fell behind enemy lines, retrieving their ashes became more than a recovery mission, it was a sacred alchemy of honor and psychological warfare. These weren't typical funerary rites, they were high-stakes operations conducted by specialized units trained to slip through enemy camps like shadows, their objectives twofold: to reclaim the physical remains of the fallen, and to leave behind a message etched in dread. The process began with the Rabat Adonim, or Ash Seekers, a secretive order of commandos who operated under lunar cycles. Clad in charred linen armor dyed the color of soot, they moved through hostile territory with eerie precision, tracking fallen comrades via a gruesome but effective system. Each Carthaginian soldier carried a clay token around their neck, inscribed with coordinates of their hometown's sacred kilns. When burned, their bodies would emit a unique mineral signature from pre-imbibed potions, mixtures of saffron and powdered lead that turned funeral pyres faintly green, visible only through filtered lenses carried by the retrieval teams. Ancient scrolls from the ruins of Carthage detail how these operatives could locate a single ash mound among hundreds by moonlight, guided by the spectral glow of chemically altered embers. But the extractions were only half the ritual. Once the ashes were secured in bronze urns lined with salt from Carthage shores, the seekers would leave behind a calling card, a palm-sized terracotta disc stamped with the image of a crescent moon swallowing a sun. These weren't mere taunts, they were meticulously crafted psychological weapons. Roman accounts from the siege of Agrigentum describe entire garrisons unraveling after finding these discs placed precisely where their sentries had stood hours earlier, proof that Carthage's reach extended even into their most guarded spaces. Modern archaeologists have unearthed these discs scattered across former battlefields, their edges often worn smooth from frantic enemy hands turning them over and over, searching for traps or hidden meanings. The true genius of this practice lay in its layered symbolism. By treating ashes as sovereign Carthaginian soil, the rituals reinforced an unshakable doctrine: no Punic soul could be trapped in foreign earth. A recovered training manual from Leptis Magna describes how seekers underwent brutal conditioning, fasting for days while memorizing ash dispersal patterns in wind tunnels, learning to distinguish a compatriot's remains from enemy cremations by taste alone. This wasn't just macabre expertise, it was a theological statement. When Hannibal's forces retreated from Italy, they spent weeks exhuming and repatriating ashes, a logistical nightmare that baffled Roman observers. Only later did the strategy become clear. By refusing to let even dust fall into Roman hands, Carthage denied its enemies the psychological victory of desecration. Rome's eventual imitation of these rites only proved their potency. After the destruction of Carthage, Roman legions adopted a diluted version, collecting fallen officers' ashes in silver canisters, but missed the crucial element of psychological theater. Without the haunting discs or chemical markers, their efforts felt transactional rather than transcendent. The difference between the two empires' approaches survives in the artifacts. Carthaginian urns bear inscriptions addressing the dead as sleeping warriors, while Roman versions coldly list names and ranks. One civilization saw ashes as embers awaiting rekindling, the other as administrative inventory. Today, special forces recovery missions owe more to Carthage's ash seekers than they realize. From the U.S. military's "no man left behind" doctrine to the DNA identification protocols used in modern warfare, the echoes of those midnight retrieval operations linger. But perhaps the most profound legacy lies in a recently discovered mosaic near Tunis, a depiction of an ash seeker kneeling not on a battlefield, but in a wheat field, scattering reclaimed ashes into the wind as farmers sow seeds. In that image, Carthage whispers its ultimate lesson, that even in death there are no endings, only returns and resurrections. Carthage didn't just rise to power, it hacked history, bending the Mediterranean world to its will through 50 revolutionary practices that rewrote the rules of warfare, trade, and empire. From poisoned jewelry that turned diplomacy into assassination, to elephant armies fueled by fermented superfoods, to naval harbors that weaponized the tides themselves, this wasn't just innovation. It was a masterclass in asymmetrical dominance, where every weakness became a trapdoor and every strength was amplified through ruthless ingenuity. Picture an empire that didn't merely compete, but rigged the game, where merchants carried antidotes as currency, where dreams dictated battle plans, and where even funeral pyres transmitted coded threats across the waves. Rome's eventual victory wasn't a triumph of superior ideas, it was a frantic scramble to copy, bury, and erase Carthage's brilliance before it could outpace them completely. And that erasure is history's greatest tragedy. When Roman soldiers finally breached Carthage's walls, they didn't just burn a city, they incinerated an entire operating system for civilization. Libraries holding celestial navigation formulas, treatises on genetic hybridization, manuals for concrete that self-repaired in seawater, all reduced to ash, leaving only fragments whispered in enemy accounts or buried in the unlikeliest places, like funeral masks and child's toys. We're left piecing together a phantom superpower from chemical traces on amphorae and the grudging admissions of Roman historians who couldn't fully conceal their awe. What if those archives had survived? Would our world still use Carthage lunar agricultural calendars? Would naval engineers build unsinkable floating fortresses from shipwrecks? The Mediterranean might have become a Punic lake for millennia, with Rome just another footnote in Carthage's imperial ledger, but here's the beautiful irony: Rome's censorship failed. These 50 practices refused to die, they slipped through the cracks in disguise. Hannibal's fermented barley rations became athletes' carb-loading rituals. Carthaginian vinegar concrete inspired unsinkable modern seawalls, and their psychological warfare tactics echo in every special forces handbook. Even the humble barcode on your grocery items owes a debt to those Punic merchants who first embedded authentication codes in pottery. The victors may have burned the records, but the ideas were too resilient, too perfectly adapted. Like those war elephants bred to dance through fire, they outran the flames. Now we turn to you. Which of these 50 practices stunned you the most? Was it the spy schools that turned enslaved linguists into human recording devices, or the harbor acoustics that turned whispers into fleet commands? Drop your answer below, and if you're hungry for more lost chapters of history, from the Mongols' phantom cities to the Indus Valley's undeciphered weaponry, hit that subscribe button. Because this isn't just about Carthage, it's about every civilization that got erased, every innovation that was stolen or buried, and the clues waiting to prove that history's greatest tricks are still hiding